And we are live. This is Dark Journalists. Oh, what a fantastic crowd we have out there in the Ideas Room already tonight. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, the Golden Dome is blue, and there's nothing I can do. Now, you might ask, why would a golden dome be blue? I'm going to explain that to you and all sorts of interesting intricacies about the Golden Dome, the sweetheart project of President Trump. And that goes very much along with his incredibly historic, groundbreaking announcement of UFO disclosure via the Department of Defense and other agencies of interest. I'm going to read his fascinating statement tonight. This is a blockbuster Friday that we're here for, and we are going to take it very, very deep, no holds barred here tonight in this special episode. It's X-Series 216, President Trump, Deep State X-Protect Battle for the UFO Files Secret. It's all there in black and white, and it has been for a long, long time. But, this tug of war in the background going on over the UFO file really reached a flashpoint this week with first Obama's comments about aliens, which we went over last week, and those were very off-the-cuff comments, but they said dramatic things for a former president. And, of course, Trump got pushed off his timeline, which was apparently July and the anniversary of both the nation, 250th anniversary, and also of the Roswell event. So that was all going to take place there. There were hints from Laura Trump, etc. We're going to get into all that tonight and show you picture of the background of President Trump with the UFO file, so we all understand what this battle over the executive branch control and the X-Protect black budget control of the UFO file, a crucial distinction in any geopolitical situation that we've been looking at. And according to the top physicist in America at one time, it is in fact the highest national security secret, higher even than nuclear. So we have to imagine the secrecy limits around this. We're going to get very, very deep into the implications of President Trump's incredible statements here and where we take it from here. But before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Sergeant Honey Badger says, happy historic Friday, Ideas Room. Daniel and Olivia, God bless you both. I cannot express how grateful I am for your many years of deep research, unselfish disclosure, and sacrifice and bravery. Cheers. And Darren says, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about the release, DJ. You are the first person I thought of when I heard the news.
Well, it's fantastic, and thank you very much. I think one of the things we've cultivated here is this idea of potency. That is, we're not just going to deal in pop-click headlines. We're going to give you the real, not just the sizzle, but the whole steak, as it were. And we've seen in the zone that we're in independent media, it's gotten glommed onto and astroturfed by corporate media. So staying potent in that environment and being competitive, getting the word across, requires that rapport that we have with the Ideas Room and the kind of ripple from the information that we can generate here in that exchange of ideas and bringing forward this kind of dark journalism research. So we're doing all that. We had a fantastic time this afternoon, and thank you. 4.3 million views on the Alex Jones show today so far. And they continue every 4 hours to rerun that thing until noon tomorrow. So yeah, it's remarkable. I've always found this about Alex. And of course, I was on Alex's show Wednesday, and here's the weird kind of psychic synchronicity of the whole thing. We had this whole back and forth about Obama's comments and Trump, and that Trump was going to respond, but Trump hadn't responded yet. And as Alex pointed out, 6 months previously, I had been on his show and said that it was Obama who was going to come out and make this dramatic assessment, and it was going to shake things up on the UFO file side. That turned out to be true. I was basing it on the fact that Chuck Schumer apparently was giving Obama all kinds of instructions in the background. And Chuck Schumer ran up this UAP Disclosure Act thing a couple of times before the Senate, and it failed on multiple occasions. But the language was very, very fuzzy. It was like, oh, we'll look for it the way that we looked for the JFK records, and we all know how that turned out. Not very transparent, as it were. We had a huge failed committee last year, which was the task force for the declassification of all these things in American history, like the Kennedy assassinations and the UFO file and Martin Luther King's assassination. And it was run by Congresswoman Luna, who's been in the picture on a lot of this stuff. She's right up front there with Tim Burchett. Unfortunately, the two of them in that committee, I don't know if they didn't get the right kind of resources or direction, but the committees were really put on bad committee hearings, and they did not have the right people. And by the time they got to this September UFO one, it was literally like a wall. It reminded me of like some kind of 1996 documentary on UFOs.
Mhm.
Like, is there a secret KGB file on
Mhm.
UFOs? Tune in tomorrow. So we had a lot of that, and it looked like this push, this kind of transparency push, was at a standstill. Now, the year before that, we know there had been a huge series of congressional hearings, but that was getting really subverted. And what happened in 2023, actually, is we put forward some intel about the blue UFO program, which is what it was over the 60 years of course of time, and how they had hid it in various departments in the government. This related directly to exotic technology, which is where a lot of the UFO file work was stashed. Now, I didn't say that it had addressed the question of the alien presence, but it was about this exotic UFO technology. And what happened was a number of counterintelligence agents came out of the woodwork and contacted me and were like, "Hey, how are you? I really enjoy your work. By the way, where'd you get that blue? How'd you know about that?" Like, and so that came through my own deep research on the subject matter, but we put it out in a documentary there, and it was, the JFK Blue UFO documentary. And what happened was quite fascinating because the government, this must have been ricocheting through the government. And so that March of 2024, they came forward and said, we did have Blue program. It's true. It was called Blue, Kona Blue. And, the thing was, it was all about crash retrievals, but there never were any. So we didn't feel, the need to really put this out there. That's the government on the record talking about this. They had a program, apparently. Now, later, there was also a weird article in the Wall Street Journal about something called Yankee Blue. And Yankee Blue was a program supposedly now. And again, notice the blue thread through all of this, just like Project Bluebeam. Blue, if you want to understand the UFO file, you have to understand the term blue. And but what happened there is quite interesting. Yankee Blue was supposedly some kind of hazing thing where they show new recruits in aerospace or these deep programs like in the NGA or NRO, and they show them false UFO films to scare them. And supposedly, when they come out, if anybody comes out of that program with a whistleblower thing, they can point to this and say, aha, look, it was just our hazing program. So there was some weird attempts in the media to bottle up the UFO thing after it had been spilled unceremoniously by a lot of counterintelligence agents like Lou Elizondo and others. So the ops have been hard and heavy in the Central Intelligence Agency taking the lead on the UFO threat CIA operation. This is all to create the Sky event, UFO threat. They had congressional hearings. They had the media pushing this threat. And they got the data back and they were like, I don't know if people are actually going to buy it. And that's where you got the drone, swarms and all these things that were taking place in New Jersey and all the bizarre strangeness that's never really been explained. And what they were doing is taking advantage of kind of naive journalists, like guys like Michael Schellenberger, who they'd be doing other things, and then they just got introduced to UFOs overnight, no background at all. And they were like, hey, look, there's a half dozen CIA people around me giving me counter intel. And so they went before Congress, guys like that, and said, I have this program. It's called Immaculate Constellation. Don't you know that Immaculate Constellation? Wow, this is really going to blow the lid off everything. Well, it's 14 months later. Haven't heard another peep about it because it was just some illusionary thing they pumped in there to kind of cut the sizzle, cut the momentum. And they were very successful at that. They've been moving around. They want this just right. And one of the things that they were worried about is when they started to hear in the background, these deep state groups started to hear that Trump was moving on his own. Now, Trump has been moving to pull that UFO file back under executive control. That's what we're going to get into tonight. And I'm going to show you the clash there with X-Protect and Trump in this situation and go over many of the details that I was able to get to a lot of them today with Alex. And Alex is doing a really excellent job of putting a focus on this and looking at it from a variety of angles. So I give him tremendous credit because he has a real, he has a real threshold for BS in the field in terms of the UFO thing. He wants the real facts, and he's doing a tremendous contribution, I think, for all of us on the transparency side there. So that was fantastic to be on there, and we had a great time. Now I'm going to put that whole show in the newsletter. If you haven't seen it, make sure you go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for the newsletter. That's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch around the censorship. And I'll make sure to put a link for that in there. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Jessica Rodriguez says, will Trump be remembered for being the disclosure president or the misinformation president for disclosing only 1% of the truth? That is not the disclosure we need. And Kenneth Swartz says, will X-Protect X out Trump?
Whoa. Well, I certainly hope not. I think you see this activity, you have to be careful about when you get around presidents calling what I call balls and strikes. Problem is, each president is going to have his own things to confront, his own supporters. You can't get into the office without some kind of major support network behind you. And there will always be criticism of what that network is. That's just the way it is. When Kennedy came in, they said, oh, he has all of Joe Kennedy's connections back there, all those business things from Wall Street and all these other things. But he had a vision for humanity, and he had earned many things on his own by being a congressman and a senator, etc. So there's always going to be criticism of that network that lands you in there. The question is, what kind of courage do you show within the limitations of the role of the most powerful figure on planet Earth, which the president certainly is? The role of the president, for sure, is the most powerful position in the world. Now, so in terms of what they do with it and the courage that they show with it, that's what really makes them a great president or not. Abraham Lincoln, going through the Civil War, showing tremendous strength and courage and faith. President Kennedy facing down the Central Intelligence Agency and preventing nuclear war. And then later CIA people would come out and be like, yeah, look at Kennedy and all his mistresses and stuff. That's the way it is, because he's their enemy and they control those aspects of the media. So it's very easy to throw mud at a character like Kennedy and say, it's like, oh, some young playboy, and he was a rash disaster of a president and all that. It's amazing to me because you take your enemy out and then you also have to, after a while, the story catches up to you because everybody knows that the intelligence agency removed the Kennedys, and it's just there in the DNA of the country. And it becomes a kind of 100th monkey moment where, the subconscious of everyone kind of interlocks, and it just is so obvious what took place there back in the 60s. I always recount that when I look at it, because it all took place way before I was born. But when I see it, if you look at it historically, you'll see that it was a civil war. It played out. But here's the thing, our side lost. And instead of those celebratory, documentaries about, wow, all the things that we got done in the 60s, basically the deep state moved in and removed the leaders, and installed their own. That's what happened. So you got things like the Vietnam War, you got things like the Cold War, the war in space, the arms race in space. And I'm going to read you something very interesting tonight about President Kennedy's last UN speech, where he was talking about going with the Russians to the moon. And this is a crucial aspect to understand that level of geopolitics. And it takes us into the Trump presidency because basically we talk about releasing the files. We're talking about a presidential issue, which is who actually controls the UFO file. And it should be the executive branch, responsive to the people. So the executive branch and the legislative branch should be in control of that information. To have this shadowy aerospace intel network, that I refer to as X-Protect, and have demonstrated their activities over decades, to have them in charge of this as a kind of a third factor blackmailing governments, including because they're inside this government, but they also blackmail it. It helps us so much to understand the concept and the term, the deep state. We're going to get into that tonight as well. This historic announcement by President Trump that he is going to release, he's going to instruct these agencies to release this information. We're going to read from it verbatim here in this special X-Series episode, live stream, Trump Deep State Battle, X-Protect Battle over the UFO file and the secret tech. This is it. You're in the heart of the X technology and the breakaway group facing off in public. We're going to be taking your questions, I want to remind you, in the second half of tonight's program. And you can ask those anytime in the ideas room, and Miss Olivia will be putting them together as she does. Before I go any further, what do you got?
Fred Olson says, one thing I am in total agreement with DJ on is that this whole disclosure op is bogus, a grab for money and a desperate attempt to hold on to power.
Yeah.
Many people also think that this disclosure thing is a massive distraction away from the Epstein files.
Well, you know what's weird? I'm going to really, the people who are thinking that, I'm going to really flip them out. It's actually kind of the other way around. You see, if you get to the heart of the UFO file aspect, it is the top secret inside of the national security state. So if I can constantly refer to the UFO file or disclosure as a distraction, I'm actually forever going to remain barred from the very thing that is going to show me what's actually happening in terms of the governance on planet Earth, right? So if I get away from it, if every time the UFO file comes up, I say, oh, it's just some government op. No, you have to have the understanding of two tracks when it comes to the UFO file, the real genuine thing and the counterintelligence CIA story. And once you bifurcate those two, you're in a totally different world. You're on this duality path. That's where it needs to go. Unfortunately, in the media environment we're in now, what's happening is you're seeing a lot of the, the media take on the counterintelligence people as the last word on the UFO file. That's the last thing that you need in relation to this. I've demonstrated it for years, over and over again. We've been proven right. That's not to be like, hey, I'm some great person for exposing this. No, it's to say, here are the facts. In any debate, when you put facts forward and the other guy puts his facts forward, and after a while it gets leveled out, things get exposed. So the people that we exposed who were lying because they were counterintelligence, they're the best trained liars on the planet. But everybody, was pushing along with this thing. And as it turned out, they had been lying. And it was amazing to me because a lot of the news outlets and things, when the Trump announcement hit, what were they playing? They were playing the Tic Tac video and all that stuff. But a lot of this had come in under very shady, untrustworthy circumstances. So those aren't bona fide videos by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, one of them, the Go Fast video, is hilariously debunked because the Go Fast object that they were demonstrating there was only going 40 miles an hour. Now, here's the interesting thing. The genuine trove of UFO file videos and sensors and photographic evidence will show you dramatic performance. But who is achieving that performance? This is a really key question. So first, the announcement. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Drum roll, Miss Olivia. Psychic drum roll. Telepathic drum roll. All right. Donald J. Trump, the president. Based on the tremendous interest shown, I will be directing the Secretary of War and other relevant departments and agencies to begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, and other unidentified flying objects, UFOs, and any and all other information connected to these highly complex but extremely interesting and important matters. God bless America. Now, this is a very interesting section. Any and all other information connected to these highly complex but extremely interesting and important matters. Trump has always kept his powder dry when it came to the UFO file. He would always spin around with it. Donald Jr. has a real interest in the subject, and Trump knows so much, and we're going to show exactly how much he knows through the figure of his uncle John Trump, the MIT professor, physicist, and protege of Vannevar Bush, who was in charge of the UFO file, and also the scientist who went in and was sent in by Bush and the FBI to look for information in the Tesla documents about advanced exotic technology that could take down flying objects, UFOs, at a distance. 1943. How does that feel? That's a 80 some odd year swinging pendulum. When we look at that and we think about Trump in this, John Trump coming upon the Tesla information and then working on the UFO file with Bush and then forming MJ-12 and all the rest of it, we have Trump right in the heart, in the middle of that exotic technology question. Now, over the years, I've done a series of episodes on it, and I've proven John Trump's role with the UFO file. A lot of that information was not on the record. People are starting to catch on a little bit that he had, the deeper connections on the scientific side. But we were able to bring that out because if you really follow the trail and go outside of the things that are left out or left off the record, then you're getting somewhere. And when it comes to John Trump, the Tesla aspect is one of the big giveaways. But being the protege of Vannevar Bush, who was the dean of MIT and in charge of, the really things like the Rad Lab and the major secret development projects during World War II, served 5 presidents, FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, Johnson, Kennedy. I mean, this guy was deep in the soup. And so we found that lineage and we passed it on through the various shows on this. Robert Sarbarker, who was the physicist, who was really the top physicist in the United States, he went on the record and said, the UFO file is a higher national security secret than the nuclear bomb, which is, if you can even imagine what a statement like that means. What's funny is a number of researchers came back to him in the mid 80s and said, do you remember saying this? Like, what were you talking about? And he was very straight up about it. He said, you know what? We went into this. I remember exactly what happened, and we did find bodies, but we figured someone had constructed them and they were insect-like. And somebody had constructed them in such a way that they could withstand the tremendous speeds that their craft could go in. And he talked about how von Braun was associated with the program and Arthur Compton and others. So we have that incredible link. Of course, and even though he was in his 70s, Sarbarker died under mysterious circumstances as soon as he gave that out. And the story goes something like, one day he goes to get in his car and there's this weird jelly on the handle of the car. And he thinks it's weird. And then he's driving and he basically starts feeling like he's having a heart attack, goes to the hospital. He calls his son and he says, you know what? Something was going on there, because as soon as I felt that jelly stuff, I started to get sick. And this is exactly how he would die. I didn't think they wanted him talking anymore. He had revealed quite a bit, but what he revealed is sitting there on the record. And we're going to show you how it plays into this divide going on in the background over the essence of the UFO file, what they were able to pull out of there, and what UFO disclosure actually represents, and how the term alien came up in both Barack Obama's comments and President Trump's retort. I'm going to get into all that tonight. I want to remind you to go, especially if you're new here, to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch around the massive censorship that we experience on this channel, especially when we bring these things out. I was joking with Alex about that today, and he was like, you know, you wouldn't believe who's watching today. So, you know, like, this is your chance to really deliver that message. And I did. One thing I wanted to point out about the various solutions, and I do love this about what Alex does with his show, which is he does the coverage, and then if he sends a message to the White House, he'll give his instructions for how to do things better. And we were doing some of that today around what Trump should do in relation to the UFO file, and how, if he's serious about pulling it back under executive control, which I'm sure he is. I mean, look at the Space Force. Space is a war-fighting domain. You know, then what he needs to do, in fact, is appoint a person, a UFO point person, basically that UFO czar idea. No one from counterintelligence, no CIA people, no NSA people, no NRO, none of that stuff. An investigator to go in there and to face off against Boeing, Lockheed, and others that have held on to this material through a deal that was struck as far back as 1956 with Vice President Nixon, when he temporarily assumed the presidency from President Eisenhower. And President Eisenhower would, you know, kind of sheepishly tell President Kennedy, who was coming in, you know, that control over that UFO file slipped away, and now this is the thing you need to pull back under executive control. Well, we can all see, you know, President Kennedy struggling to pull a number of things back under executive control, and it's a 3-year battle, and we all know how that one ended. So we're going to do things a little bit differently. My suggestion with Trump was literally to create this full court press with real congressional hearings with subpoena power, and to squeeze that entire process to produce the actual results. And you can go into key things regarding even the most historic cases, including the Roswell case, the Aztec case. The Kennedy assassination actually would lead you, a real investigation of that assassination would lead you directly to the early activity of hiding the UFO file and how it branched out from there. Now, they have so many things that have taken place from redeveloping that technology that I don't want to be naive that they'd give up this massive profits, you know, just to please the public on that. But I think that Trump is raising the gamut, raising the level, raising the intensity in an effort to get it back under control. And the X-Protect group controls it right now. They're associated very closely with the Central Intelligence Agencies and the top private aerospace companies. So the question is, can that be brought back under the umbrella of executive control? We're going to find out tonight. And one of my suggestions there for the Trump administration, an investigative process to determine which branches of the government are holding that information and to bring them before Congress. And there is a way to do aspects of that, and it can become actually a great citizen venture. No military people, no military intelligence, no central intelligence people, none. Zero, zip, zilch. That's the first rule. When you see counterintelligence agents in there doing the stuff, it's all over. And then you're going to get, you know, the kind of cooked disclosure that people have been talking about. And that's really how you'd get it too. So, you know, my definition on that would be, you know, what are you talking about? And you're going to have to really be serious. My real point in this is, if you did congressional hearings and you brought some of the people who were in charge of that program for decades, and I can identify at least 5 of them, then you're going to want to bring them before, subpoena them before Congress, bring them on. And if they want to take the 5th, go ahead, but it's going to expose that network. I'm going to show you also that some of the very early UFO minders and the people who are handling those programs got involved early on with AI. And one of those people is Bobby Inman, who is a very interesting character on a number of levels. And he was somebody who was NSA director, CIA director. And he, you know, he's retired now, but he still operates in these think tanks and things like that. he's somebody who would know a great deal, and somebody I think that Congress should talk to, in fact. And one of the things that I would like to know the most is after he left office, after minding the UFO file and material, etc. And remember, in the 80s, he was actually part of an effort to bring out the UFO file under certain types of circumstances. Um, but Inman is fascinating. We did our 200th episode on Inman, if you want to see that one. And it was funny because it was the height of the summer. I think it was August, and it was generally like, in August, you don't expect, everyone was telling me just hold off on that 200th episode until the fall, because that's when, the audience will be at their most focused and all the rest of it. In the summer, people aren't even around or whatever. I did it anyway because the information was too good. And so that episode is there, and it is a breakthrough. But one of the things I think is crucial to find is if any of the UFO investigatory processes that were undertaken by people like Inman, when he went into private industry developing AI, and he was one of the key AI developers, and 3 of the main AI developers all came out of his initial branch work. Did they in any way use the alien information, the UFO file, exotic technology in relation to AI? Because then you could be looking at something that got spliced in there. It might explain a number of the strange anomalies that are going on in relation to AI. You see, this can reach into a very deep, deep story the more we go into it. And, those are just facts on the ground. You don't have to speculate or say, hey, I wonder if the UFO people were into AI. No, Inman is a perfect example. That's the way I would approach it. And I would also approach the scientific assassinations and build in protections for the scientists who were assassinated around the exotic technology. What's interesting and tragic is there's a case that just took place of a scientist, and I wanted to get to these details on Alex, but I'll get to them here tonight instead. It's a tragic case, and I want to say this before I even get into it, that when I observe these assassinations of these scientists, I'm fully aware of the kind of dimensions of what it means to their families and the people personally around them. So I don't just take it as a theme or as a headline or whatever. What I'm trying to do is kind of do them justice by showing what took place in relation there. I've observed a number of these and people around the secret space program and others. And here, we were just talking before about the MIT physicist who was dealing with plasma, Nuno Loureiro, who was shot here in Brookline, Massachusetts. And the whole story around the guy who shot him is so shoddy and strange, and that this guy was shooting up students at Brown University, and he drives up here, very easily, and he takes out Loureiro on his porch. Now, then he drives up and goes to New Hampshire, and he ends up dead in some storage room, and they don't find him for 3 days. And then they're like, oh, look, there's these videos where he talks about how he's going to do this crime, but we never get to see the videos. It's just, official police information. But I have to say that this story caught my eye thinking about Loureiro. This is Carl Grillmeyer, and he was shot by a man who was arrested. Now, this is interesting. There was a guy who was arrested for carjacking that they picked up immediately after the scientist was shot. And I don't know if they can actually prove the connection or not, but it seems very, very convenient to me because, this guy had lived there for a number of years, hadn't had any incidents, and then suddenly, he gets shot on his porch. There's no money taken, but then this other person supposedly goes off to carjack, and they're like, hey, that's the guy who shot him. But we'll see how this all spins out. I'll withhold judgment on it. Renowned scientist who studied distant planets fatally shot at his home near LA. Authorities suspect Carl Grillmeyer was shot by a man arrested for carjacking as friends mourn him. This is the story that's been all over. And Caltech astrophysicist fatally shot on the porch of his rural Southern California home where he studied the stars. And, whenever you see these things happening in a timeline, in a grouping, as they were with this UFO announcement, you have to wonder if they aren't related. And of course, in the case of Lorero, there were a number of strange combination of circumstances there, including the fact that the Trump Media Association, his whole media group that he owns, was taking a stake in a fusion company named TAE. Now, I'll go into more details. I have a show on TAE coming up. I did a show with Dr. Farrell around Lorero. We had a huge section on Lorero and Valenti, but this will go even deeper on it. So I'm going to get into the article here. A renowned California Institute of Technology, Caltech scientist who studied distant planets and other areas of astronomy for decades was recently shot to death at his home in a rural community outside LA. Authorities said Carl Grillmer, 67, died from a bullet wound in the torso on Monday. According to information from the LA County Medical Examiner's Office, the county sheriff's department said it had arrested a suspect, 29-year-old Freddie Snyder. This was the guy that they caught carjacking. They just assumed, well, if he's carjacking, he must have shot this other guy. I say not necessarily, and the rush to judgment there is interesting. LA Times, of course, it could be the person. We'll see. The LA Times quoted a Caltech spokesperson who confirmed that the university employed Grillmer as a research scientist. He helped explore the universe as part of Caltech's Infrared Processing and Analysis Center, a partner of the U.S. space agency NASA. When I looked into his history at NASA, he had very special privileges for the work that he was doing there, Hubble telescope and all the rest. 4 decades of experience in the field, including hundreds of publications, exceptional scientific medal achievement medal from NASA. The story and the timing on it, we'll see how that shakes out, but it did, it was ringing in my ears. Whenever you get around this, there's a story, of course, running around in 2017, 2018 about these holistic doctors that were being killed off. And there was such a pattern there that it was becoming obnoxious. And many of them were involved in this GC math explorations. And I went into, there were good researchers doing different things on it, but it got so spooky that at a certain point, because I know a lot of people who do holistic work, and one of them, I was looking for a particular guy who did holistic type of, a certain type of system medically. And I had reached out to talk to him, and I heard through a mutual friend that this guy was in hiding. He had moved to another state because he thought, they're moving in on this. Now, it's my belief that the holistic doctors wave, just like when they were throwing bankers out windows previous to that. You see these waves once in a while in these industries, getting rid of the evidence, as it were. But it's very fascinating to me because one of the aspects of that, in my opinion, related to the COVID operation that needed to come forward, and they couldn't have these people around talking. But also the fact that they were related to this GC math cancer aspect and cancer treatment. It was just a little too much. One of the stories about Dr. Bradstreet, who was this guy was such a mover and a shaker around GC math that his Carolina office, his South Carolina office had been raided. And they wanted to know, what is he doing with this medication? He obviously was on the verge of some kind of breakthrough that they didn't want him to get to. But anyway, there he was in another part. He was visiting somewhere in Florida. And, he shows up at his hotel and they say, your room's not ready yet. So he goes off to a little supermarket and he buys hummus. And then he goes to a liquor store, he buys wine. And as he's driving home, and I'm sorry, this is a gruesome detail, as he's driving off there to the motel to enjoy his hummus and wine tonight, he decides, you know what, I'm going to stop by the river and, walk out to the river and shoot myself in the head. So the circumstances around that were incredibly dodgy, and there was never any follow-up investigation, except for the fact that people around that community DC math, holistic doctors, etc., they knew that something was up in relation to this. So this is how this goes. When you see these patterns, they're being targeted. One of the other people in relation to this, when I was mentioning Lerrero, is, Lerrero, one of the key things that I found out about Lerrero is that he was studying, and this plays directly into this disclosure aspect, and it plays directly into the idea of studying a deeper physics, this causing the problem, the so-called apotheum research, reality distortion research. It was interesting because in all of his bios, I was looking at the various things that Lerrero was involved in. I have a picture of him here. A young man with a family. I think he was in his 40s. Lived in Brookline in a nice condo, and was doing his work here at MIT and was well celebrated. Now, one of the things that I caught was that in these various tribute pages to him, somebody who had worked closely with him said he was always fascinated and he was so excited about the work he was doing on neutron star mergers. This caught me, and I looked into the neutron star mergers. Then I found his activities in relation to it. And thank God that person had posted those. I think it gives us a hint. And as I said, I'll go into a special episode just around this aspect. But just to give us a hint that this would relate to black holes, and it would relate to this idea of stars exploding. And how you could track that research back by having fragments of the actual explosion. So the possibilities there for this type of research, for this type of energy, all taking place at MIT, to me, certainly come up as the reason why somebody like that would be assassinated. Now, a number of people around free energy, a number of people around the UFO file have been eliminated under similar circumstances. What I say about the X-Protect group is actually what they generally tend to do is discredit the people that are involved. And in the UFO file, that's easy, right? There's also the imitation of the thing. So, when the CIA sends their whistleblowers out, their whistleblowers are all like, oh, I'm in danger. Look, I'm wearing a bulletproof vest, So they know how to flip this around, but the real people that should be protected there are the genuine whistleblowers, the genuine scientists working around things like the UFO file. That's something that can come directly in through Trump's efforts to declassify and reveal and disclose what the government is holding in its records in relation to the UFO file. But I'll tell you, Trump putting this on the record is a gigantic shakeup, and we're going to get into why next. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, this is deep, deep waters tonight. We're going to be, we'll go here with you for, say, till about 10:30 here Eastern time. And of course, I want to remind you, we're going to be taking your questions in part 2 of the program after I get to this JFK Trump, John Trump intertwined UFO file story. In the meantime, Miss Olivia, you're up.
Deep State, you're fired, says the battle is real. As DJ said, the period of disclosing secret tech and the UFO file is maximum peril. And James Price says, X-Protect, wet works, running wild.
Oh, yeah, that's really true. Well, it was interesting, I mentioned that comment that Alex was saying about who was watching today, and I had a later confirmation about it. I'll talk about that sometime. But I will say this, that that was from the show today, and Alex was really on fire as usual. He was doing a great job.
Man, he was putting you through your paces.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely.
I had a great time. But I will tell you this, that John Warner came on this show around Thanksgiving. And, John Warner IV is a really somebody very knowledgeable guy. And of course, he is the son of Catherine Mellon, who is the Mellon banking heiress. And we've had great conversations, public and in private with Mr. Warner. And his father was John Warner, the Virginia senator who passed away and was married to Elizabeth Taylor. And so, I mean, just incredible life the guy has led. But he's put many things on the record about his grandfather, Paul Mellon, who was deeply, deeply involved in these programs. And then going further back, his great grandfather, Andrew Mellon, who was Secretary of the Treasury and just, involved in so many different areas, including the Cosmos Club. But one of the things that Warner told me was that he went into this think tank that was all about in Washington, D.C. recently in the last year or so, because he'd been off the radar for a little bit after he came forward on my program and really spilled the beans. And I wondered if he was ever going to resurface, but of course he has a lot of grit and he will resurface. And he did just in time to kind of push back against the Age of Disclosure nonsense movie, which was, a documentary that was done by Dan Farah, who was basically in the pocket of the Central Intelligence Agency, and who's somebody who had been a producer for Spielberg and had been the agent for Lou Elizondo, who was the counterintelligence agency that was stirring all of this fear and UFO threat activity. I mean, if that's a three-way, that guy was a triple threat or a triple loser, depending on how you want to look at it. And the first thing they did before I said anything about their movie was block me. I thought that was fascinating. They know, where the the lay of the land is in social media. And of course, I've always been straight up and said, I offered any of those people to come on this program at any time. And of course, there was a resounding block, a wall there, which the whistleblower, UFO whistleblower David Grush told me that Christopher Mellon held that gate in place, that no one was ever going to come on this show because, basically he didn't want his program exposed. And that, of course, is the DOD billionaire Chris Mellon, who was the cousin of John Warner. But Warner had gone into this think tank, and as soon as he got in there were two interesting things. One, they all knew him from this program. And so they had all been watching all the UFO shows. One. Two, and I can name some of those high level figures, and I won't because I'm not a grandstander, but whoa, and the ideas room and the ripple from the ideas room is real. But the interesting thing is the second part is that some of the people that he talked about were in charge of internet companies, large internet companies. And I could even mention some of the companies like Sprint and things like that. And they were all very convinced on the UFO side. They understood the aspects about the advanced technology, et cetera. And when he brought up things like, what do you think of the dangers of this? And how about how we should handle it and all the rest of it? They were all like checked out, completely checked out. They did not want to know. They just knew about it in terms of dollars and cents. That there was something in the background there that was brewing, that was advanced technology and exotic technology that was going to help them reach a better bottom line. That's where they were coming from. And he was astounded, of course, because he's sitting in the middle of all this. And, he told me some other things about it. I'm not going to mention because I want him to be able to go back in there and participate. But wow, I mean, this is an incredible situation. But one of the things that Warner wanted to tell me about was that everyone in there knew everything about this show and the details we've brought forward. And it had weighed into this kind of, education of theirs, this extracurricular education by watching the program. But I will say this, that the clash on the UFO file now, anyone armed with the truth basically constitutes a majority. So you might think there are all these, sort of podcasts, or there were all these accounts out there that are just pushing these counterintelligence people. And it is a problem. It's a major problem because there's a distraction there. They're trying to win a social engineering narrative war. However, the truth is that here we are right in the heart of it, rocking that narrative very hard with the truth. And if President Trump is now squaring off against these groups who are doing it, they're going to try to infiltrate that wave, and they will infiltrate it through people like Donald Trump Jr. and others who, when he was doing podcasts and stuff, they were coming on his program or whatever. The key thing for Trump is not to allow anyone like Elizondo anywhere near that program around getting to the truth around the UFO file. And although I said there should be somebody who's an investigative czar, they shouldn't have any connection, none, to any intel branch at all. Nothing. No family contacts, zip. And that's the way it has to be. Now, you might find that there are good people in intelligence. I wouldn't write everybody off on that level at all. It'd be ridiculous. However, when you come to this particular line of inquiry, you can't have anybody, unless it's somebody who's just completely disgruntled with that program and got out of it a long, long time ago. But this is, I think, maybe the crucial question, the threshold for President Trump as he goes forward, which is, how are you going to do that type of investigation? And we saw that the committees, the Luna Committee, the Burchett aspect, those committees failed because they didn't know the right questions to ask. Maybe they were even interested in getting to the bottom of the truth. I don't know, but they didn't do the job. There's no question about it. We saw them last year sprawling around, getting nowhere. But what I will say is I think the possibility exists for this to be a legendary endeavor that they could take, the Trump administration could take this football of disclosure and run it down the field if they have the right people doing it. So if they're listening tonight, I can tell you the first thing to do is to find a strong investigator or an investigative committee and have it not include any intel personnel. That's key. That's crucial. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, X Series 216. It's Trump, the deep state battle, X Protect battle for the UFO file, secret tech. We're taking your questions here, maybe in about the next 20 minutes. I still have a lot to get to. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Lee It Be Me says Trump should get more hands on the whole thing. Demand results for the viewing public, like on The Apprentice. In a way that makes sense.
Well, it's interesting. I'm sure his Apprentice, experience helps him when he's dealing with the media. I'm going to show you an arc. I'm going to paint a picture of how Trump fits in with UFO disclosure and how there's a crisscross there with President Kennedy and the Kennedy family. And I'm going to show you the roots of, Trump's power zone in relation to this, including Roy Cohn, President Nixon, and others. And I'll do an abbreviated version here. Certainly, we've done some serious deep state episodes about President Trump. This is a very interesting image. That's Trump in a rocking chair. Miss Olivia.
Is that JFK's rocking chair?
Well, you guessed it. You guessed it before I asked the question. Now, he participated in a huge auctioning of JFK memorabilia. And there he is sitting in JFK's rocking chair, favorite rocking chair from the White House. And of course, JFK with his back problems would use rocking chairs in order to keep his back mobile. But they're, touching in and being part of this auction of JFK memorabilia in the late 90s. A signal, again, as so many signals in Trump's background. Of course, one of the most crucial signals, his relationship with his uncle and his uncle's relationship to investigating the Tesla information. One of the things that I showed on Alex's program today was the painting by Delschau, who was a German who came over here to spy on an aerospace group. We've done a number of programs on it. Walter Bosley is the author. Has covered a lot of it. This is all very interesting because that group was doing way more advanced things in the 1860s and 1870s than the Wright brothers later, for sure. Right in the heart of it is one of those paintings that Delschau did. And of course, I showed this in my documentary, JFK, The Final Speech. You can read here, of course, right in the heart, across the top, it says
it's
Trump.
Amazing.
And over here, it says 45, and Trump, of course, was the 45th president. Now, remember, all the Delschau artwork was recovered long after he died, and it's been shown in museum for 50 years or so. So there's no question of its authenticity. The question is, how did this advanced aerospace group know, one, that Trump was going to be in the heart of the aerospace piece, and two, that he would be associated with the number 45. It's a strange prediction on a lot of levels, and there's a lot of this activity around Trump. You know, and it's lent itself to this kind of phantasm of people saying, oh, he's a time traveler and all these other things. However, when you look out over the histories of the mystery schools, you know, one of my favorite examples comes to mind, which is Helena Blavatsky. When Steiner was talking, Rudolf Steiner, the Austrian mystic, was talking about Helena Blavatsky, he was saying that a number of mystery schools were aware that she was coming in. So they were aware of her birth. That's how keyed in they are to a certain system of understanding. And very often, a lot of these kind of sophisticated spiritual teachers and things, you'll notice when you go back that you'll look at Gurdjieff or Blavatsky or Ouspensky and others, and you'll see that there's always some confusion about their birth, including Steiner, which there's a day, 2 different days that are listed for his birth. And the idea apparently is that these people are going to make such an impact as spiritual teachers that they don't want to be, and the groups that are representing them don't want them to be easily tracked astrologically. So you can see that we go into unusual territory when we get into this, but it's a fact that there were now advanced airship groups operating in the 19th century who were projecting the name Trump in association with aerospace and flight. And here is Trump coming forward as the fulfillment of that by saying, basically, here's UFO disclosure. I'm going to disclose everything the government has on this. Now, are there ways to get around Trump and his proclamations and the things that he wants to do? You bet there are. One of the best ways to do it would be to throw in a plant there who's saying, I want to get that government to give us disclosure, and their CV is just a bunch of intelligence work. So that would be the way to really deflate the entire thing. The other thing that they could do, I think, and this is going to become an activity that we're going to be seeing, which is they're going to be going to the means, and they're going to be going to the reasons for Trump for doing this. And as was pointed out earlier, oh, isn't this just a distraction for Epstein? And as I said, I'm going to repeat, it's actually the other way around. Because if you can really get people off the track of the UFO file and often say it's just the ultimate distraction, you're going to actually keep them away from the thing that will give them, in this case, the most power of understanding how that global governance system works. Does it relate to money? Yes. Does it relate to secret finance? Yes. Does it relate to secret projects? Yes. Does it relate to secret technology? Yes. Well, those are your answers, right? So if I keep you away from that and I throw this other material at you, and then something really big comes up in this other thing, and they say, oh, you know what? That's just a distraction. You know, that's Project Bluebeam. Well, that's the end, right? That's the end of your inquiry into the thing, the very thing, the one conspiracy that can actually be unplugged. And now we have the power of the presidency behind it, you see? So in my opinion, the thing to watch out for is a co-opting of this effort, not the sincerity of the person asking for the disclosure, but the groups around them. Because as I said, Trump has an incredible track record of being involved in around the UFO file. And there's no question in my mind that his development of the Space Force in the first term, you know, there hasn't been anything like the Space Force. You go back, and I'm going to read you something here. There have been all these promises about space stations, moon visits, everything else, visits to Mars. Bush Quayle said, hey, we're going to Mars. Believe it or not, Bush Quayle. What is that, 1991? And as a matter of fact, there's this famous thing in history where Senator Lloyd Bentsen gets the ultimate jab at Dan Quayle, and he says, Senator, I knew Jack Kennedy. He was a friend of mine. You're no Jack Kennedy. Well, just more for these weird coincidences in history. If you go back and watch that debate, which is, you know, from 1992, it's very interesting because, or it might even be even earlier. It might have been the first go round. Maybe it's 1988. But if you watch it, what is Quayle talking about just before he gets the Kennedy zing?
Do tell.
He's talking about developing a space station so they can go from the space station to the moon to Mars. And he lays it all out. And he also says, guess what? I'm going to be in charge of it. So this is actually strange things going on in the background. Now, here we have an article from January 2004 about George W. Bush, and it's the New York Times. Just listen to how this plays and how nothing in the reality of it comes to pass, but just listen for the plans that they had at the time. George W. Bush is playing with fire. He is expected to soon make a major space policy announcement that could include a return mission to the moon, the establishment of permanent bases on the moon, and an aggressive program to take humans to Mars. Sound familiar, SpaceX, Elon Musk? Estimates for these space projects range from 50 to 150 billion. That is, of course, before cost overruns set in. In order to make the trip to Mars feasible, Bush is expected to commit to using nuclear rockets, which is now known as Project Prometheus. Named after the god of fire, the nuclear rocket would cut in half the amount of time it would take to get to the moon and Mars, and would have military applications as well. The Bush administration a year ago announced Nuclear Systems Initiative, billions of dollars of research and developmental efforts to expand the number of launches of deadly nuclear-powered systems into space. Nuclear dangers. And they go into the nuclear dangers. Michio Kaku is in here warning about this program. Question mark, why the moon? The U.S. never signed the 1979 Moon Treaty that was created at the United Nations to prevent a rush of land claims and military bases on the planetary body. In fact, in a 1959 U.S. Army study entitled The Establishment of a Lunar Outpost, the once secret plan stated that the lunar outpost is required to develop and protect potential U.S. interests on the moon, to develop techniques in moon-based surveillance of the Earth and space. And it goes on, actually, the article itself is quite fascinating. There's so many different aspects going on here. They even mentioned Paperclip in here. Nazi scientists came to the U.S. under the top secret Operation Paperclip. Von Braun, along with Walter Dornberger. Now, you notice Walter Dornberger shows up in so much of my research because it is, he's the Nazi scientist that employed Michael Payne, Lee Harvey Oswald, the patsy that they chose for the Kennedy assassination. His family moves in with the protege of Walter Dornberger, the top paperclip scientist, who was in charge of von Braun. So we're looking at very, very unusual connections here. And, I'll bring these all in. But here again, now you have a Bush-Quayle initiative saying we're going to Mars and the moon. You have an initiative that says, you know what? Here's Bush. He's playing with fire. He's going to the moon with nuclear rockets, and he's going to Mars and all the rest of it. What on earth happens to these programs? Where do they go? They disappear into a void, and that void is the secret space program. The secret space program right at the heart of the exotic technology programs that are hidden. So if you can get to the heart of the UFO file through the presidential effort and extend it into a true legislation committee, not the kind of Burchett sideshow type thing, but something really serious where people get subpoenaed and put on the spot and people get removed from their positions if they lie and all the rest of it, then you see you could be in a totally different environment. That's the environment that we need to be in. And those are the types of questions that we need to be asking. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 216. This is the Trump deep state battle with X-Tech and the X-Protect group over the UFO file, secret covert programs. We're taking your questions here very shortly. And I also want to say that we're coming off of 2 episodes of being guest appearances on the Alex Jones Show. And today, this afternoon, was one of them. And so we got a tremendous response on that. And thank you very much. I had I'd seen we had something like 4.5 million views from that. And, it's fascinating to me because the information, as I've said, when the information is potent, you can, whether you're talking to 10 people or 5 million, it's the potency is the thing that's going to count. And, when we get in the ideas room, we have that core of the information and we have that understanding that goes back and forth. That's a major key. And I want to see that it also feeds my own imagination and it feeds my own quest on these things. So it's a salute to you guys in the ideas room as well. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
L. Wolfjaw says, if it is the case that almost all the UFOs are our tech, then what can they disclose? And Beiman says, I've read that every branch of the military has a different piece of the UFO file, which they selfishly control. How do we know that the UFO file even exists in one spot?
Well, that's what they're referring to there is compartmentalization. And you're absolutely right. This is the nature of the problem with getting to the bottom of the UFO file. However, I would also say this, that there's a great deal of information that suggests that it's actually hanging out outside of the government. And this is also a problem because this was done long ago. And as I mentioned, it was done under Richard Nixon when he was the vice president who took over for a month when Ike had serious health problems. Now, it's interesting because they go back and forth in history. Was it a stroke? Was it a heart attack? And if you listen to, the accounts by Nixon, he said that Ike had all these problems. He had almost like dyslexia, that he was saying things backwards and reading things backwards. So that sounds like some kind of neural issue and episode that he was having. So the idea that it was a heart attack is interesting, but whatever it was, it kept him completely out of there. And Nixon did, in fact, take over. Now, this is pre-presidential Nixon. This is the young, 39-year-old VP coming in there. And he almost got thrown out a couple of times, with this whole thing about a slush fund and stuff and the Checkers speech. And it makes great history because he was like, we didn't take any bribes. And, my daughter was given a little dog, but we named the dog Checkers. And as a result of naming him Checkers, we're not going to give him back. And he got all this support and he got to stay on the ticket. But in the background, he was cutting deals with CIA Blue Book. And he was very deep in the heart of this. And one of the people who came to me before they passed away was Robert Merritt, who was the intelligence agent who worked in the Houston plan and was basically a messenger for Nixon. And what he wanted to tell me was that Nixon was very distraught over Watergate and wanted to place what he knew about UFOs with certain people, one of them being Henry Kissinger, of all people. But he also wanted to keep a formula about his UFO knowledge at the White House in a time capsule. And that entire story played out as this very unusual drama that took place with Robert Merritt. But there were always dimensions around the UFO file with Nixon. And when I got the upfront, encounter of dealing with Merritt for so many months, who was an absolute operative of the highest order, who had been deeply involved in a number of different networks, spying on the UN and all kinds of things. And if you go back into the literature in the 70s and 80s, you'll find Merritt throughout these different books. And it was, in fact, that he had this association with Douglas Caddy, who was the Watergate lawyer who gave me the information about Kennedy being assassinated over the UFO file. So it was an interesting overlap with the two of them because those two great big characters of history giving us this deep information came through on this program. And I got very, let's say that my own level of knowledge about how those programs worked moved up rather dramatically because I was always interested on the research side. But by talking with them, I got even deeper insights. And it's funny because very often when people, very classically as a Warner story where he's saying, a lot of these people come to me and they're saying, how does DJ know? How on earth could he have figured this out? And they're people who are on the inside. And, a lot of it is the fact that when I work with people on that level, I take them to heart and I follow up their methods. And in a case of Robert Merritt, I asked him the same question over the course of 6 hours in so many different ways that it was impossible to lie to me at that point. But his key message was that what Nixon was going to do was he was using Pine Gap to redevelop now the UFO file into a totally different energy source because they had the incredible Arab oil embargoes and things like that at that point, 72, 73. So as a result of this was the program that he was working on. I was speaking at the same time to a director, Robert Emenegger, who had been working during the same period for Nixon on a UFO disclosure movie that he wanted to come out, and he wanted the Nixon White House to present this UFO disclosure movie. So we need to understand how long this battle has been going on. We need to understand that the fluff junk like Corbell and Elizondo, that's all junk. Clear the way the junk and go for the genuine aspect of the UFO file. This thing has gone through presidents from Nixon to Reagan, back to JFK to Eisenhower. And now we are standing on the threshold of this historic announcement, going deep to say, how can President Trump rattle these agencies? So I guess the way to best answer your question is, yes, they're incredibly, there's an incredible labyrinth to hiding this material. However, remember what I said in relation to Trump and with his development of the Space Force. In my opinion, he knows a great deal about it. Yes, what do you got?
The weed in your garden. Question. Obama lied about not having captured crafts. Trump said Obama was leaking classified info. Are they in cahoots in a smokescreen?
Look, I'll tell you this about Obama. He's no dummy, okay? Obama is a very advanced figure around all of this. And the way he was able to glide through various controversies in his own presidency should tell us that. When he says aliens are real, this is prepackaged. This is not an offhanded response. This is something that he was waiting to lay out there. And it was a way to, as soon as they knew, they had found out for certain that Trump was going to go ahead in July and make some kind of announcement. They said, we need to get there first. And by the way, if we can get there with Chuck Schumer's talking points around UFOs and that whole bit, then this end of the spectrum can get their hands and have the UFO file under their context instead of the executive branch under Trump. Now, remember, it's not under the actual control of either. I think that's a crucial thing to understand, because if it were, then this wouldn't look like how it does. There's a push-pull over certain aspects of how to get it. And then there's a thing in the middle which has to do directly with aerospace and intel. So this is the crisscross. And the question is, they've been hiding this stuff in the background. They've been developing. Now they've been profiting off of it. Now they want to profit in a major way. But there's a group back there that wants to use it. This is the X-Protect group. They want to use it for a UFO threat to create the ultimate emergency powers situation. This is the thing. This is the threat and the danger. And think about the powers that are involved with the continuity of government program and with the secrecy of the UFO file. It is, that is a solid block of power, and it has a kind of extraterritorial quality to it. There's some factor in there. And then we have these insiders in the government. We're talking about secretaries of state, CIA directors and others. They know certain things about the UFO file, and they, as part of the administration's push, will be involved in this. And depending on how serious the effort is, we're going to see a lot of interference. It's like there was a Super Bowl that took place recently involving the New England Patriots, unfortunately, and you saw these interceptions. Think about the UFO file research field exactly like that. You have one group pressing for it, they're pressing down the field, and somebody intercepts it, runs the ball the other way. That is what Obama did. And he did it successfully because he moved up Trump's announcement, which was, again, going to take place 6 months later. So I think it kind of threw Trump's timeline off a bit, but here was Trump reasserting himself and also saying that Obama's going to get into trouble for mentioning that because it's classified. Well, what did Obama say that was classified? He said there are aliens, but they're not at Area 51. What part of that is classified? You see, what we keep at Area 51, or are there aliens? It's very strange. The whole thing is strange. And the way they kind of diffused it was when, Trump's like, I'm directing the Department of War to do this. And they should immediately change it back to the Department of Defense. But, as soon as they did that, Hegseth puts out a little gray head on his Twitter feed, ha ha. So, either you're going to get somebody real to go after this stuff or don't even bother with the effort. That would be my opinion. But Trump is certainly serious. I'll put it to you that way. Yes.
Scarlet Fire, true disclosure will steer the spending of trillions. So how it is done makes a big difference to the friends of the government.
Well, this is absolutely true. It already is. And they've been in the background. Look, my favorite example is Andre Carson. You might not know Andre Carson, but he's an older, Democratic congressman. This guy has been in office forever. And he's never talked about an aerospace thing in his life. Suddenly, he was showing up on Ancient Aliens. Yeah, I'm not kidding. And then he gives press conferences and he's like, we don't know, are the aliens interdimensional or are they, inhuman? I mean, ridiculous stuff for a congressman. Where are all these Congress people? Where do they get interest in the UFO file? What happened? Well, I've been documenting this, especially the push over the last 5 years around this. Many of these Congress people, you're like, why are you even interested in this, Eric Burleson? What are they telling you in the background that's so important about this? And part of what they're whispering is just talk UAP. The money train is coming in. The gravy train is coming your way. They're going to unleash these technologies. You're going to make billions. Just shut up and say UAP. And this is the way that they've played this situation out. But when you really get down to it and you say, why are these people interested in this? It makes a great case. Why are these people suddenly in front of microphones, saying, hey, I want the UAP truth. Look, there's a senator, a congressman who became senator of Arizona. And he was basically a nobody in the general spin of things. He was not anybody who was well known by any stretch of the imagination. He starts talking about the UFO file. His stats go through the roof all of a sudden, and he becomes senator, beating out Carrie Lake for senator in Arizona. So you see, there are all kinds of rewards when you are playing the game, as it were. Rubio was playing the game when he was senator, and he got to be Secretary of State. And in my opinion, has maintained his kind of hawkish qualities. And I think a lot of the Iran saber rattling that we're doing and moving destroyers over there close by is part of that Rubio group. I was talking with Alex about that today, and he was saying, that he thought the Vance group that the Rubio group was far more neocon than the Vance group. And I absolutely 100% agree. So we're in weird territory there. And if you want distractions from, scandals in politics, certainly the idea of an Iran war would get you there. And I think, by the way, let me go on record, that is a terrible idea. And the minute one missile goes sailing towards Iran for no reason, then we're in really deep, deep trouble. And, I've heard people saber rattling in social media saying, we need to go in there and take out the leadership in Iran. It is not the job of the United States to remove the leadership of Iran. It is not. There's no charter anywhere that says if a country is doing bad things, we have influence. Yeah, we can extend influence. And, we certainly can lay different things on them, like tariffs and all the things that we do, the punitive type of things we do to Russia and Iran, et cetera. But we don't have any rights to just roll into a country and take it over and remove their leadership to get something that's more friendly. That's all CIA activity and CIA mindset. And whenever you see that activity, it's probably CIA bots, as well. Now, I can understand people wanting a better government in Iran, and we can do everything that we can to support that. But rolling into their country and taking it over with our military, no way, especially with their oil reserves and everything else. What does that make the United States look like? These are the types of things that President Trump needs to be hearing from in his national security team, not, hey, we can look tough by bombing Iran. It's ridiculous. And, Trump has been the ultimate isolationist before this recent turn. He's never wanted to involve himself in anything like that. Yeah, he sent some missiles after ISIS and things like that. These were skirmishes. But the Venezuela action at the beginning of the year, and then all the saber rattling and destroyer action around Iran, where does that even come from? I mean, what is Iran even doing to us except that we don't like their policy, and we might not like how they act in their neighborhood or whatever, but that's not a reason to invade Iran. So let's get real on that one. All right. Good questions. Fantastic questions. Now I'm going to move John Trump.
Alrighty.
Are you ready? So, I have an episode coming up called Surreptitious Entry, all about a very interesting book that came out in 1946. Now, the reason it's interesting to me is because the guy who put the book out was someone who he had this incredible reputation of getting into any situation, kind of like a James Bond character. And he was the ultimate safecracker for the United States. So they could drop him into Nazi-occupied France. He could go straight into their State Department, drop himself in there like a special forces guy, get in their safe, get the documents, and get out. And so he was literally one of the best. Now, interestingly enough, there's a lot of different accounts of John Trump when he was in 1943 working in these secret projects for the United States. And one of the things that came up was all about the different ways that he got the Tesla information. Now, he was sent in by, the FBI and the Alien Office, which they try to use this as a backdoor way to get all of the different things from Tesla, saying, well, technically, he's not really a citizen of the United States. And what they did there is they went and they created these circumstances and situations. And John Trump, at the end of his life, started to talk about it. One of the things that he said was, well, they talked to me and they were very concerned. As a matter of fact, when I went to go get some of the things that were in the hotel from Tesla's possessions, that they literally had hidden out behind these pillars and things because they thought if I open these suitcases, they're going to explode or something. So they were terrified on one hand. But if you go into that story, one of the pieces that's missing, and of course, 3 days after examining his artifacts, the things that he found of Tesla's effects, he had to say, well, there were many interesting things there, but nothing that really was consequential scientifically. And that's what they needed him to say. But a number of the trunks that were associated with Tesla's files disappeared quite quickly after this took place. So the government just spirited off with them, as it were. And the original account now goes a little bit differently as we've heard it. When we hear that Trump is sent in, we just think he goes to his hotel, he checks the safe, he goes through his papers. Well, actually, his first stop is to a very large storage room where Tesla had kept 86 different trunks. And what he says is that we were able to get through 2/3 of them. Okay. He's not really attributing to who's looking through the others. But his group entails all these different people that are going to help him navigate the information. And they're mostly scientific people. And there's one military guy on that team. But he notices the name of this other person that he doesn't recognize. And it's the safecracker who writes Surreptitious Entry that I was mentioning, the James Bond guy. And right in the heart of all this, he goes back after the fact of showing up and realizing some of these papers maybe aren't here. And the question pops up in his head, did somebody beat me to Tesla's hotel room? And so he goes back later and he goes to check and he sees, was this guy a civilian investigator? And he realizes he's this OSS super safecracker. And he realizes that basically he's been jerked around on this. So on one hand, he's investigating Tesla's secret papers, but apparently someone else got there before him. So when I was reading through the pages of Surreptitious Entry, this guy over and over again is incredibly satisfied with himself for getting there first. So there's a gigantic crisscross in Trump-Tesla information there. I do think that John Trump got to some very important Tesla information and, in fact, used it, and that the government hid it. But I think some other factor related directly to this OSS, which became the CIA, got their hands on something there first. And this was a crucial aspect. I will say this also, that one of the things that John Trump talked about was that Nikola Tesla was talking to the king in England and sending messages back and forth because this whole Hitler menace was getting into position. And he was saying, we can develop the kind of defenses and these kinds of rays that will keep any invading army away from you. And so in terms of experiments or things he lent out or things that went black, certainly John Trump was right in the heart of that when he died. And that knowledge base and the trust that they had, because he was, John Trump was Vannevar Bush's protege, they both thrived there in that MIT environment, which is very close by. And I remember all of the strange steganography around Trump's work. One of the greatest things in the world was going to MIT and because you had to make an appointment to actually see John Trump's papers, because they have papers there. And you go there, and the first thing you see on his in that box of papers is X. So you can imagine, I was instantly like, well, the X steganography really speaks for itself. But if we understand later on that John Trump as well will go on to work in secret programs, do microwave space radar, space communications, and even be helping Ronald Reagan with early aspects of communications around SDI or Star Wars, and the fact that he got the Presidential Medal of Accomplishment and also its equivalent in the UK, we can see that John Trump, as I said, wasn't just a nerdy professor at MIT. This is a deep player working with the deepest characters. So when I go through the early Trump interviews from the late 80s, what I found out, one, is that Trump himself was part of a continuity of government group meeting with the Reagan administration on a regular basis. He was taken under that wing. Trump, we have to say this about continuity of government. Continuity of government group, as I've mentioned at the outset, is a group that will take over the United States in the event of a national emergency. And they have a combatant commander who's simultaneously the head of NORTHCOM and the head of NORAD. Now, one of the things about this we should understand is that NORTHCOM didn't even exist until the events of 9/11. The terrorist attacks gave the government the excuse to create NORTHCOM. Now, we had SOUTHCOM, we had CENTCOM. The idea was this is how we'll run and keep an eye on these countries. But NORTHCOM is set up to keep an eye on us. That's the problem with NORTHCOM. So part of the reshuffling of government should also include a real strong look and audit of NORTHCOM, because why is NORTHCOM even there? That's basically like military takeover. So NORTHCOM has these unusual pieces, and one of the things was the continuity of government program wasn't even really talked about. It was brought up in a hearing all the way back in the 1980s with Oliver North. And he mentions, hey, yeah, I was working for a continuity of government for emergency powers. We had this program, Rex 84. And, all the people in Congress start freaking out. And they're like, shut up. You can't say anything like that. And the Congressman Daniel Inouye, who becomes one of the main factors around TTSA and ATIP. Remember ATIP? They were like, oh, there was this super secret government outfit that was running UFOs, and Lou Elizondo was the head of it. Well, there's the whole, anyone who studied that knows that OSAP was the actual program, and ATIP was this thing made up so that they could say Lou Elizondo led a UFO program. But the 3 senators that were involved in setting up this, kind of cover were Ted Stevens, who died in a plane crash in Alaska, and Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, and of course, our friend down in Nevada, Senator Harry Reid, and Dirty Harry. Those were the guys that set up this front so that eventually Elizondo could say, hey. Later, when pressed on this, they said, number of people started to say, well, Elizondo, wait a minute, did you actually lead the program? Because everybody in the media, that's all that was shoved out there. He led a secret UFO program. Wow, look at these secret films and all this stuff he's got. Turns out that he was Clapper's little puppet string, marionette. And Clapper was behind him, and he was a CIA operative and a DIA operative. So this is just more of the same that they were doing. But it is fascinating to me because ATIP, there's a weird crossover there with, in a way, shutting down and saying, we don't talk about COG in Congress in 1987, and then later being directly associated with this UFO cover program. So on this program, we've revealed different programs, including Blue and things of that nature. And as I mentioned at the outset, the government had to actually refute Blue and say, yeah, we did have this program Blue, but it's not, it never really, even though it was built to retrieve UFO craft, it never did. So don't even think about it. But you see what can happen when civilian investigators get involved and put things out there. That is the power of the interaction. As I mentioned this in the ideas room, but it's one man armed with the truth constitutes a majority. I will state it over and over again, because what you have when you get into the UFO field is a false attribution of authority. And the false attribution of authority is quite simple. That authority always goes to the intelligence agencies. When in fact, anyone who does any true research on this knows that you stay away from the intelligence agencies, because they'll never give you the truth, because they don't have any incentive to give you the truth. Think about it. Why would the Central Intelligence Agency give you the truth about UFOs? They have no incentive to do that. It's an incredible asset to the powers that they represent. And they've been able to hoard and hide that secret information to such a point where at this point, we're so disconnected in the public, we don't even know what they have. And so Trump's announcement comes out of the blue, and he says, you have to release any alien or UFO material that you have. It's pretty interesting because we're down here, and this process has been basically in outer space, So how do you bring those two things back into balance? Well, I can tell you one of the things that you're going to have to do is deal with the people in the middle who are profiting from this secrecy, right? That's part of the problem. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, X-Series 216, Trump Deep State Battle with X Protect for the UFO file, secret tech. Deep with you tonight. This has been Freaky Friday, and just absolutely incredible the things that are happening. We started the day off, of course, doing the Alex Jones Show, a fantastic episode. We just were on Wednesday as well. So we had an incredible time there with Alex, who's doing a fantastic job bringing this information out and really allowing a lot of dark journalism to get out there past the walls of censorship, which is so crucial. We're going to be taking your questions here. I've already gone over my time, but I still have more. So I'm going to settle this by going through this quickly over the next 5 minutes or so, and then we'll take your questions. Mm-hmm. What do you got there? You got something?
Back to Uncle Trump. Arena
Yes.
wants to know, is this why they raided Mar-a-Lago?
Oh, wow. The Mar-a-Lago raid set off a number of different things and also set a very unfortunate precedent. As a matter of fact, one of the things that Trump joked about in terms of, at first, he was very serious about how Obama had stepped out of line mentioning classified information. And he said, well, maybe I'll get him off the hook by disclosing some things. That's weird. That whole thing is very, very strange. Here's a couple of things to keep in mind. Suddenly, all the emphasis has gone to the moon. Everything. Elon Musk is now focused on developing a moon city rather than taking humans to Mars. Something has happened. There's a shift there, and the Golden Dome is right in the heart of it. This just came out by Brooke Griswold in Defense One. SpaceX and Blue Origin abruptly shift priorities amid U.S. Golden Dome push. The Golden Dome is the reason for the shift away from other space programs directly to this moon program. Now, remember, it's weird. Our relationship with the moon is weird. We just did an episode on the moon last week. Our relationship to the moon programs is particularly weird because the Apollo program still shrouded in secrecy. How we got there, it's not quite clear how we got off the moon. No other company has been able to imitate it with a manned mission. We apparently aren't able to imitate it because we haven't done it since 1972. That's 54 years ago. What have you been doing in the meantime? Hey, we're going back to the moon, 2028. There's an incredible executive order directive that Trump puts out at the end of 2025. And it's all about how we are going to, on one hand, abandon the space station. We're not going to be there anymore. This is weird. This is weird stuff. But also we're going to have a base on the moon, and that base is going to have nuclear reactors to power it. And you're going to have kind of a human colony up there and God knows what else. But let me read a little bit from this Defense One article to try to figure out what the push to Mars is all about. We're going to tie that directly in with Trump's pronouncement of UFO disclosure. Just a year ago, SpaceX majority owner Elon Musk dismissed going to the moon as a distraction. Now SpaceX and Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin are racing toward it. I want to say this about Bezos' grandfather, which is he was directly connected to DARPA and the UFO file back in the Kennedy era. So, we have to keep that in mind with Bezos as well. He's directly tied in. Now, within weeks of each other, the two largest U.S. commercial space companies abruptly shifted their priorities toward lunar development. The moves came as the Department of Defense accelerates plans for a next-generation missile shield known as the Golden Dome. By the way, the Golden Dome has a $300 billion price tag. I don't even say that to say how wasteful. I say that to let us know the gravity on the surface that they are presenting a program that is worth that kind of money. Okay. This is serious, serious money. So, you're getting into some serious territory. Part of the whole freak out over Greenland that we've been seeing has to do, apparently, directly with the positioning of the Golden Dome in relation to Greenland. Now, the moves came as the Department of Defense accelerates plans for next-generation missile shield known as the Golden Dome, raising questions about whether America's return to the moon is as much about defense as it is about exploration. Right. In early February, SpaceX announced it would redirect plans for a future city on Mars to establishing one on the moon instead. The reversal was striking, as Musk previously insisted Mars was the only meaningful destination. Now, what I want to remind you is that I recently, in the last year, did a documentary, JFK and the UFO File, all about Lloyd Berkner. Now, Lloyd Berkner is the person who was pushing very hard for Kennedy to go to the moon and to Mars. And he was helping him develop the speeches. We choose to go to the moon. And what it was going to say was, we choose to go to the moon and Mars. And the and Mars part got pulled back. I put on the record that Gordon Cooper, the Gemini astronaut and part of the Apollo setup program astronaut, just a deep in NASA. They're working close with von Braun and others, said that they had a mission and he had been tapped for it in 1966. He'd been told to get fit, that he was going to lead it. Later, when they called it off and they said, don't ever mention it again, he left NASA. But he found out through his various astronaut friends that they had another mission, and it was planned and it was set in stone to go to the moon, to go to Mars by 1981. There was going to be this mission. And they had already tracked it out. It was going to take less than a year to get there and all the rest. What happened to that mission? So the mission disappeared. Cooper has it in his autobiography, but it's gone. Even he wonders, I don't know what they did with it. And there's this whole thing about, senators holding it back or whatever, but it was kind of the fluff response. Now, what I want to put across in all this is Berkner himself was deeply, deeply involved with the UFO program and had run the UFO program, the Robertson panel, in the early 1950s. Berkner had also been in Antarctica with Admiral Byrd all the way back in 1928, and Admiral Byrd dedicated his book to him. This is how much of a player this guy was. He was a radio wizard, and Herbert Hoover apparently had moved his career into position. But one of the things that he also did was he set up all of the radio for Amelia Earhart, and Earhart shows up over and over again, whether you're around the Mellon family or Trump releasing Amelia Earhart documents, and all the various strange things related to Amelia Earhart keep coming up. There's something intangible in the middle of all that. But again, the idea of surveillance, the idea that they could do this kind of surveillance at the time, maybe it's even how they got some of the earliest UFO reports. Berkner was actually set up to meet President Kennedy at the Dallas Trade Mart, and President Kennedy rode into ambush on his way to meet Berkner and was assassinated. Berkner later would say, the president was going to say things that would have staggering international implications, but he didn't get to make his speech. I've gone back and found things out about that speech that are very strange, including the fact that it disappeared for 5 years and resurfaced through the owner of Neiman Marcus because he was friends of LBJ. And the speech that did reappear seemed to me to be too Cold War-ish and nuclear favorable for Kennedy to have given. So what the actual speech was going to be, no one knows. And yet what I found out in the record, which is quite extraordinary, is that the ceremony that was planned for it and that Kennedy had planned for it was dramatic, in fact, and included the idea that they were going to take a flag that was flown over the White House, fly it in by a helicopter, a presidential helicopter, and have Kennedy present the flag to him at the Trade Mart ceremony. So this is a dramatic speech. It wasn't just like, hi, it's nice to meet you, I'm the president, and here we go. This was, I'm flying in a flag from the White House to give to you, and we're going to make some kind of announcement together. Kennedy never makes it there, and Lloyd Berkner hangs out in history, having been a part of the UFO file, having been a part of Antarctica, having been a part of the International Geophysical Year, where they discovered all these things in relation to the ionosphere in Antarctica, and probably a lot more. So these are the types of things you see. If we penetrate through, we can understand what took place in the background to create the scenario of ultimate secrecy that the American public eventually just got used to. And I would say that the fact of Berkner's character in the heart of all this, that if we explore it and we understand what was going to take place in that ceremony, we can get to the bottom of why there are all these peculiar UFO references and Antarctica references when it comes directly to the assassination of President Kennedy. One of the people I was corresponding with, was Harold Malmgren before he died, and he was a Kennedy staffer in the national security setup. And I had talked to Pippa about him and talking to him and all the rest of it. Pippa was his daughter, who was associated earlier with these Republican think tanks and things, but she puts out all these interesting articles. Her latest article is all about how the real reason they want to go up to the moon is H3, which is helium-3, and this creation of this unlimited power source. But one thing that she put on the record, and she kind of put it back out on the record as soon as this Trump announcement hit, was that her father, Harold Malmgren, was of the belief that Kennedy had been assassinated directly over the UFO file. Now, when I spoke to him, he had, unfortunately, when they went to film him at the end of his life, the person who was filming him didn't know what questions to ask, so it was a big fumble. But I had asked him some key questions there at the end, and he had gotten some answers back to me on X, of all places. So it's an untimely death. But before him, of course, Douglas Caddy had given me the information that he had got as a Watergate lawyer, that Kennedy had been assassinated over the UFO file. So these things, these pieces start to add up, that Kennedy was sharing that deep UFO file with the Russians. That needs to come out as the reason for his assassination. So you see, when you get a D-class committee and you're going after the UFO thing over here, and you're just doing it for show and podcasts and things like that, and then you have a Kennedy hearing over here, and you're the same committee, and it's all dry, and you don't have any of the informed people, then that's been a waste of the government's time. With this, and with Trump's announcement, it should re-energize the whole aspect of declassifying that. The thing that you need to do, if you're somebody who's in charge, like Luna and Burchett had that committee, the thing that you would do is get to the heart of the Berkner speech and the heart of how the UFO file is related to the Kennedy assassination. You can end up exploding both sides of the deep state's deepest secret. And that's the position that you need to take. That's the position that you need to go in. And we have provided reams and reams of details in relation to this. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is an incredible X-Series 216 to be here with you. The Trump deep state battle, X-Protect, that group in the background for the UFO files, secret tech. We're taking your questions. Actually, I have more to do here, and there's even a Nazi Bell piece here. But I'm going to turn it over to your questions and just roll it in as we go.
Ed Cooksey, why the UFO threat now? And I'm going to throw in, where does the AI job apocalypse factor into all this?
Right. Are robots better than aliens taking your jobs? That's the question. The AI piece that I'm interested in is, as I mentioned, these high-level figures who were associated with the UFO file immediately went into AI in the 80s. I also happen to know that a lot of the things they're hand-wringing about, like, oh, you know, AI is learning too fast and all the rest of it, they've had AI since the late 1960s. They've had the outline of AI all the way back to the late 1940s. And they had various conferences about this. So, you know, what are we talking about? You already know where it's going. You already know if it's self-aware. You already know what the direction it's going to take. And you're sitting here wringing your hands saying, you know, oh, it's beyond our control. You know, look, it just, you know, made Japan disappear. I mean, you know, it's an absurd thing. We already know. Now, of course, when you go from a level of demonstrating it secretly and knowing everything that there is about it and then laying it out to the public, there are going to be interesting things that happen in the public that maybe would be unexpected or whatever. But I think it's very important. You know, I have a whole different idea about AI and its origins. The other thing is, one of the main people, the scientist Hinton, who was one of the main people who developed AI, is now the guy out there warning against it. And we have to be very clear that there are a number of scientists who created AI who are now against how it's being used, because the idea was you were going to build in a safety factor. And what he's saying, Hinton, is that none of these companies are interested in the safety factors. They just want to get there first. So there's an incredible crisis arriving there. And I think we'll be on a campaign over the course of the next year of informing the public of the benefits and the dangers of the thing. There's no question you can get benefits out of it, but you have to do it, and you have to involve a cultural factor as well. Of course, if you throw a lot of people out of work, you're going to create social chaos and all the rest of it. And they know that as well. So the idea of just letting a bunch of billionaires roll in and take over the government and do this is absurd, right? The idea again is that the public really has the control when you get right down to it, whether you're talking about the UFO file, AI, or these other things. And what you want is the best public representatives for their position. But, so the public has to be very active and involved in this process. The government and the tech oligarchs will just take over and consolidate and centralize power. They'll create a gigantic digital control grid, which we've discussed on this program over and over again. And that will become a kind of digital gulag. And they will, in fact, take situations of people who they feel are disobedient for this reason or that reason, and they'll deliver punitive damages to them through their social profiles, their social credit scores. They'll shut off their money if they're naughty, and all the rest of it. That's a non-constitutional environment, and so if we can stick to the constitutional rule of law in dealing with any technological advance, then we're not going to have any problems. But unfortunately, we already are having gigantic issues in relation to this. The secrecy around the UFO file, I'm going to mention this too, which is that secrecy is corrosive, because what you have is a schizophrenic situation where the people on the ground don't understand all the technological marvels that we've gotten from rediscovering this technology, redeveloping this technology. And it needs to be understood. Now, there are over and over again, and I always make the point that people have lived and died talking about this. I think about all the things that Stanton Friedman told me, in his research. People have lived and died going through what the UFO file is, what the beings represent, what the crafts represent, how it relates to humanity, the things we've gotten right with it. How deep does the government cover-up go? Is the government even in control? These questions are crucial and key, and we're in a period where we can get some of those answers. However, we're also in a place where we can be incredibly deceived by the type of disinformation that the intelligence agencies have been cooking up for social engineering purposes for how long? 7, 8 decades? I mean, that's quite an advantage over us. So it needs to be gone in this kind of careful fashion, and cheerleading the CIA to give you answers is absurd. So, and my stance is not a popular one in the UFO realm, right? And that's ridiculous, right? So they want the UFO. They want to embrace the UFO truth from intelligence agencies. It's absurd. So, and many people write to me and say, well, isn't CIA disclosure better than no disclosure? No. No, my friend, it's not. You better study very deeply what the Central Intelligence Agency has done in other cases, including, torture in Iraq and assassinating presidents and, setting up assassinations for publishers that they don't like. I mean, who do you think you're dealing with? So you have to get smart in relation to all this. And I think once you come through the illusion of all that, you can start to say, oh, isn't it interesting that these intelligence groups are so out front trying to drive the narratives around these things? They're trying to co-opt what has taken place organically on the ground, which is people have come forward with their experiences, their sightings, and other things. It's an incredible treasure trove of information, which is why groups like MUFON and others were targeted, because the intelligence agency wanted to suck that up to keep control over that narrative. And that's what they've been able to do. This is a crucial balance beam at this point. There's kind of a seesaw effect going on, but Trump's going directly into the heart of it and saying, you're going to give me all the information relating to the UFO file, is pretty dramatic. You can't get around it. Yes.
James Price, could the Golden Dome be in preparation for possible contention with a presence that still resides on our moon? I have to wonder.
Well, here's the thing. There's a great deal that we don't know about the moon. That is for sure. I have not, in my own review of these types of things, seen all of the, the idea of these hostile aliens and things of this nature. And I think that you could, even if the alien part was too much of a stretch for some people, you could even say there's an advanced group that's broken away from the regular society, right? There's a lot of things to answer for, though, because these sightings and things go back into human history. So I don't think we can simply blow it off as some recently developed government program of technology. But I do think you could say that the government has discovered something in relation to something from somebody else and how to redevelop it. I think that you could make the case very easily with what's on the record. And one type of scenario, and I pointed this out in relation to the Cosmos Club, is that the founder of the Cosmos Club came from, he had been stationed for a decade in Cape Girardeau. I go back to this because when you look in history, it seems to me, even during the Kennedy era, Reagan era, still around now, the Cosmos Club is kind of the UFO Bilderberg. That's where they get together to meet and hash out the real details of the UFO file. You would need a place like that. You couldn't always be going into secret meetings or skiffs or things like that. You'd need an open place to go and discuss it. And you'll see over the years that people like Hynek were a part of it. People like Sagan were a part of it. And Andrew Mellon was the treasurer, But the original founding of it is remarkable because suddenly this guy who has one arm and has gone through the Civil War and all the rest of it becomes this incredible focal point of investment, prestige, and everything else with his journeys into the Grand Canyon. Now, later, he will develop a very close relationship with the Paiute Indians in Nevada. Now, there's all kinds of mystical details about the Paiute Indians, including the fact that their greatest medicine man, Muvoka, will be the one who will give them, during the ghost dance, these shirts where they can't be shot by the approaching soldiers. And the ghost dance is a very interesting thing that happens there in the 1880s and sets off a kind of craze among these native groups. That's all from Wovoka's magic. Well, who's guiding the founder of the Cosmos Club to all these different discoveries and things? It's Wovoka. So I think you could make the case that there was an advanced technology back there, or at least advanced aspects that would lead you to believe there was a separate group that was operational. And you could call it alien or you could call it human, but it's certainly different. They were on a different level. And that he somehow came into this knowledge and that he shared it. And that's how he got this incredible funding, because there are all these unusual things about the Cosmos Club. And I've done a series of episodes on it. I'm going to do more because I have even more information about it. But you see, that would be the kind of answer and the kind of place I would come in on that very early on, long, long before the Roswell crash, which is really an apex of a series of incidents. And remember, the very earliest people who came forward with their experiences, Jesse Marcel claimed that they wanted to send him on a mission where his plane was going to go down. And when the other two guys who were with him investigating the Roswell crash went on that plane, in fact, they disappeared in the hot zone in the kind of Bermuda Triangle, as he said. So the other major case back there is Kenneth Arnold, and he was the pilot who put flying saucers on the map, and he's out there over the Mount Rainier in Washington, and he sees these incredible group of UFOs. When he touches down, he reports it, and it becomes a craze from what he says. But what you don't often hear is that when he goes to get back on the plane, he realizes that somebody has removed something very important to the operation of the motor. And if he wasn't such a good pilot and gets himself back down before he really takes off, he would have been toast. So anytime you get around this, the very early activity of the kind of Men in Black aspect, the X-Protect group who needs to remove the people that are in the heart of this, it's operational at the word go. So I think that history needs to be much better understood. And that, of course, is something you get through this level of investigation that we're doing here. Yes.
Constance C., I wonder if the Donald had a deathbed promise to his Uncle John Trump to pursue and release the hidden tech.
That's a good question. It's a real good question. He speaks about him in such affectionate terms that I think we get a real hint there of that close relationship. There's no question that John Trump shared very important things from his scientific research with him. And, I don't think it makes Trump the master of the universe or anything. But if you walk in there and you're dealing with the deep state and you're able to say to them, look, I know about the UFO file. I've also worked with Roy Cohn for 2 decades. You're dealing with somebody who knows you and knows where your power base is. I think that would cause the kind of pushback against Trump that you saw, which, was unrelenting until this most recent getting back in the White House. But before that, it was, hey, you're going to prison. Hey, we're going to raid your house. Hey, you're the worst person, and you still hear that. Couple of quick things here. I want to read something in relation to Kennedy's final speech at the UN about what he's planning to do in space. This is a news report about it. And it should be noted that this was late September 1963, 2 months before his assassination. So it's the New York Times. They're talking about the big moon program that Kennedy wants to do. Opponents of the program cited the high cost of the proposed trip to the moon, estimated at more than $20 billion. In the midst of all this, President Kennedy, in a speech at the United Nations, proposed that the Soviet Union and the United States cooperate in mounting a mission to the moon. Why, he asked the audience, therefore, should man's first flight to the moon be a matter of national competition? Kennedy noted the clouds have lifted a little in terms of U.S.-Soviet relations and declared the Soviet Union and the United States, together with their allies, can further achieve agreements that will spring from our mutual interest in avoiding mutual destruction. Soviet Minister Andrei Gromyko applauded Kennedy's speech and called it a good sign, but refused to comment on the proposal for a joint trip to the moon. In Washington, there was a good bit of surprise and some skepticism about Kennedy's proposal. The space race has been one of the focal points of Kennedy's administration when it came into office, and the idea that America would cooperate with the Soviets in sending a man to the moon was unbelievable. Other commentators saw economics, not politics, behind the proposal. With the soaring price tag for the lunar mission, perhaps a joint effort with the Soviets was the only way to save the costly program. What might have come of Kennedy's idea is unknown. Just 2 months later, he was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. His successor, Lyndon Baines Johnson, abandoned the idea of cooperating with the Soviets, but pushed ahead with the lunar program. In 1969, the United States landed a man on the moon. Sergei Khrushchev, who was Khrushchev's son, confirms all of this correspondence. Human correspondence, nothing to do with the State Department, no track of this correspondence between Khrushchev and Kennedy, private, talking all about what they were going to do in space together. This, to me, is the warning bell that gets sent off across. It's the shot across the bow, ultimately. But you can see it building up. That's in regular New York Times media. And in dark journalism, what I've been able to do is go deeper and say, if you look at it, he's talking about doing the joint mission. He wants to share that technology with the Russians based around the space program. That's the UFO file. You get right into the heart of it. And so when you're doing these investigations, you have to get to the heart of why the reasons and the conditions would be created. Yes, Miss Olivia.
George Ivankovich, Forstall and Kennedy link. Wants more detail.
Oh, forget it. He was the ultimate family friend. They were fellow Catholics, which is kind of rare, believe it or not, in government. And, you needed that kind of support. When Kennedy ran for Congress and for president, the Catholic part was hanging around his neck. And they were like, oh, he's going to answer to the Pope instead of the people. And he came out and said, I'm not running as the Catholic to be the Catholic candidate for president. I'm running to be the best candidate. And he really had to go through his paces for this. But Forrestal, what happened is when he was young, Kennedy was undecided about what he wanted to do. He did not want to go into politics at all. That's the amazing thing about his background. And his father, Joe, had so focused himself on becoming president that he had been the SEC commissioner. He had done all these careful things, developing this relationship with Roosevelt, who considered him, whoa, here's a rival I need to really keep an eye on and keep him close, give him these little jobs and make sure. So they make him ambassador to the UK, which is a fantastic position at the time. And Kennedy is thinking, I'm going to, kind of push back on my support for Roosevelt in 1940, and I'm going to run for president. That's where his head is at. And he's always been trying to prove to himself that the Irish are just as good as anyone else, because when he grew up here in Boston, the Irish were looked down upon, and you couldn't get into any of the special groups. When he went to Harvard, they wouldn't let him into any groups because he was Irish. So he was discriminated against, and he constantly had this thing about being included, which is why, he gets involved with Hollywood, and he needs all the approval there, and he needs to be involved in these groups, and he needs to be president. And that's all Joe, Joe, the incredible businessman, bootlegger, and everything else. He builds up this incredible fortune during the Depression era, just before that, in the roaring 20s. And he knows that he's going to use all that political power. When the Depression happens, he thinks revolution is coming to America. And he has a kind of light bulb moment. Oh, I need to kind of protect the ecosystem of the country so that if I develop all this wealth, it's not going to disintegrate like it in the Soviet Union, and they're just going to have the crowds take over. So he starts to realize and starts to come around. But his job in the UK is quite interesting, and it introduces his sons into all these levels of power. And John F. Kennedy gets a great front row seat to how political power actually works. But Joe Kennedy makes some unfortunate statements around 1940, because he's thinking Hitler's on the march. We have to make some kind of a deal with them. We just need to get used to this. And, we need some kind of negotiated peace or whatever. And we can't just be at war with them. And he said, fascism basically may take over. And the careful man who had been careful for so many decades in his life let this slip and just becomes kind of a disgrace. So he's put back there. He's fired by FDR, and his chances for being president go through the floor like you can't imagine. And so he is a man defeated, and he puts all his hopes in young Joe Jr. And Joe Jr. wants to be president. But Joe Jr., it's very interesting about him. He dies very unfortunately in a secret mission during World War II as a pilot. But he doesn't have the same charisma that Jack has. I think Jack really was kind of destined to be president. But suddenly we get into this era where the brother has died. Now Joe Kennedy turns and he says, he's never really had as much respect for John and put his hopes into him. And he says, what do you want to do? And John says, I want to be a journalist. And he says, well, what you're going to do is run for Congress. And he says, well, we'll see. And he says, well, I'm going to go over to Berlin because, Forrestal our friend Forrestal is he's going to be the first national defense leader. And he's going to be basically he's going to be the first defense secretary. So he's going to go over and show me in Berlin all the ruins after the war and everything else. I'm going to write this incredible article and all the rest. So a lot of that article is quite fascinating, and that, I think, trip with Forrestal cemented their relationship on a level. There's weird things in there where Kennedy's like, the Russians are not convinced that Hitler's dead, and frankly, it doesn't seem like it. This is not very convincing evidence for the death of Hitler. So he's, Kennedy is really thinking outside the box when he's there. But I believe that what takes place during Roswell and when Forrestal gets on the MJ-12 committee is that he shares the information with Kennedy. So when Kennedy rolls into the 1950s as senator, he's already aware on the UFO side. I have a letter from him pressing people in very odd positions in the Air Force for UFO material. And we don't get the letters back. We see the copies in the Kennedy Library of the letters out. We don't see what the letters back were. I find that interesting. But you could see that the relationship was very close. Forrestal famously had this encounter where and there are different accounts of this, but that he had encountered an alien and he had some kind of a telepathic link with it and realized, oh, we need to tell everybody about what this is. But in any case, whether the alien story is true or not, he did have, he was on that committee and he did have interactions with the advanced technology. And he felt, he was an ex-share person in the middle of all this. He felt we should share it with the public. And it was Truman and some of the more hardcore forces inside the Truman administration who thought he was, you know, off the hook. Very interesting. His death, you know, going out of the window at Bethesda Hospital is quite interesting to me for a lot of reasons. One, I think he was disposed of course, and the idea that he was depressed and jumped out of this window is absurd. But one of the things I found in the middle of all this is that Ernest Hemingway was very aware of the story. And there's this boy who tells this story of meeting Hemingway when he was 12, working in a restaurant. And Hemingway is looking at the cover with the headlines saying Forrestal jumps out of a window. And he says to the boy, and the guy grows up as a journalist and remembers this conversation with Hemingway in Cuba. And he says to him, you know what? Do you believe that? He said, you know, what I heard from people, and I work in the deep military. He's saying this to a 12-year-old kid. He said there was glass in his bed. The story doesn't add up. How do you jump out a window and there's glass in your bed? So obviously, you know, they had tried to push him out the window. He had jumped back. Some of the glass had gotten into the bed, and then they finished the job. So he also told the boy that he knew Forrestal. That's nowhere in the history books. We put that on the record in this show, and I found it in some weird account by this Cuban journalist going through his life and the various things that had happened. So you see, there's a lot with Forrestal when we get around the UFO file, and Kennedy's connection with it, I think, in the heart of it is explosive. Miss Olivia, you're up.
Okay, Super Sleuth. Could the Golden Dome protect from a CME the size of the Carrington event?
I think that's what they're counting on. The easy way to think of the Golden Dome is to imagine it as a gigantic UFO defense grid. So Reagan had envisioned Star Wars, SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, as something that could protect the United States, a shield. And everyone always assumed he wants the shield against nuclear weapons. We found out from Gorbachev, who came forward and said in 2010, well, actually, when he took me aside at Reykjavik, he said, will you basically, you know, stand with us against this alien threat? So he was convinced that there was a UFO threat. Now, he had seen all kinds of intel in relationship to this, but I think the CIA had such kind of a backdrop there with George Bush as VP and William Casey as CIA director, that they were able to influence Reagan, who was older in his mind, to say the UFO stuff you're looking at is a threat. And so he started to think, you know, I have to join with the Russians to protect us. And that's where SDI and Star Wars all comes out of. Now, that's how you get a UFO defense grid. That's the first version. And the idea was that they try to pull in history was that SDI and Star Wars went away. We have so many accounts from insiders that it did not. In fact, it was the decisive factor in how we were dealing with this UFO presence. So that goes us back into the 80s and then the 90s. And supposedly in the 90s, the technology disappears. Well, it just goes black and resurfaces. And Trump himself says, oh, the Golden Dome is just what Reagan wanted to do, but now we can really do it. So, you know, we have to take that on board and start to think of space and our relationship to space on an entirely different level. When you study it, and when you study President Kennedy's quest to take us into space, you can see why the aspect of the UFO file becomes crucial. Now, it's left off the history books, of course, except that we've been able to pull it back under, the light of history through characters like Douglas Caddy and the people who've come forward, like Pippa Malmgren's father and others. There's no question. There's actually a very interesting English intelligence operative who was studying UFOs, retired from his work and was a big UFO expert. I was just listening to an interview with him, and he starts talking about how Kennedy was assassinated, most likely over this UFO file. That's what he's heard. So
Who was saying
these,
this?
well, I can't remember his name right off the bat, but he was a British intelligence operative, and I can tweet out his name later. But I had seen that interview with him, and I was thinking to myself, how many different characters on the inside are aware of this? And, we're kind of been the focal point of JFK and the UFO file, and that crisscross being the reason, the thrust behind the assassination, because they were eliminating a national security threat. Why was Kennedy a threat? Well, not just because he was being a peacenik with the Russians, but the idea that he was going to share our highest secret, the UFO file, with the Russians, gave them the incentive. So this has to be brought, I think, into the fore. And Kennedy's assassination, you see, can become part of this UFO disclosure aspect. They're both the same thing, and it is, in fact, the biggest secret inside the deep state. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Do you have Trump's note on hand about disclosure, about ordering disclosure?
I just read it.
I know you did, but do you have it?
Well, I'm sure I can find it again.
Well, what I noticed in the
Yes.
beginning is he says aliens and extraterrestrials. And I wanted to ask you about that. So,
Excellent.
What does he mean? I mean, aren't they the same thing or aren't they? And Joseph says, why must it be either or? Why can it not be demons and or angels and or extraterrestrial creatures? So all of that.
Well, that's all very interesting. And of course, we've done some fantastic conversations with Dr. Farrell about these aspects. What I would say is, the first thing that occurs to me when you get around aliens and UFOs and everything else is listen to this description, by Gordon Cooper. You can find this in his autobiography. So he's doing this training in Germany. The United States sends their pilots to Germany to train in that era. And it's the early 50s. And he has a squadron that he teaches them all these maneuvers. So while they're doing it, a group of flying saucers shows up right behind them. It starts doing all the maneuvers with them. And so what he says in a very kind of matter-of-fact way is, look, I'm a pilot. I had all these pilots around me. We were doing maneuvers. The UFOs came in. They did the maneuvers better. And then they spirited off into, infinity at incredible speeds. So for him, there's no mystery about the fact that there are UFOs, they are intelligently controlled, and they have more advanced technology than we have. So he saw it up close. He also witnessed filming of UFOs and all the rest of it, and he knew the government kept it as a secret. He approached the UN to bring on board this idea that there are intelligent races out there, and we should, start to speak about it publicly and not hide it, and all the rest. I'm sure he knew even a lot more than that. And his incredible saga with Valerie Ransone that we did this remarkable, about 18 months ago, we did an episode about his relationship there and how she was somebody who worked in the Reagan and Ford, on the Nixon Ford administrations, and had worked actually right out of the White House. And she was working on this idea of, communicating with aliens. So in those circles, it's already known that there's some kind of interaction with something. So I guess the question would be, well, why would Foo Fighters be demonic or something? If something's imitating you technologically with a craft that's more advanced than yours, you don't have to attribute anything spiritual to it. You can just say, well, somebody else is in there operating. It's a better craft. This is what Cooper, I think, was getting at. So that's the way I would say it. And I shoot down the UFOs as demons thing myself, because I think it's kind of a cop-out, because it allows us to look at something through this lens of a belief system without taking into account what it actually could be. And I think that you should be able to incorporate, the outcome of whatever it is, good or bad. And, if somebody has a group here that's advanced and they use the technology for good, there might be some other aspects that use it for more nefarious purposes, like all the gene harvesting. These are the things that need real answers. But I think that the UFO threat aspect is trumped up. I think it's ginned up, and it is it's the heart of the false operation. That's the PSYOP from the Central Intelligence Agency. If they get that off the ground, then you can get total emergency powers. You just flip the switch because you've got a UFO threat. Now everyone's on board and the government's admitted, hey, there are aliens. Guess what? They're evil and they're against us. Well, not only do we need 300 billion for a golden dome, but we need a couple of trillion to fight them off. And all the missing money, forget about that, because we were using it in the background. We just didn't tell you. You can't believe how sinister these UFOs are. And then finally, you're in a state of total emergency because the UFOs are after us. One of the wonderful and funny things that Joseph has said about a UFO staged event, a blue beam type event, is what happens when you're doing the blue beam type event and the real thing shows up. Keep that in mind. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X-Series 216, Trump Deep State Battle for the UFO Files, Secret Tech, going deep, deep into night, into the root origination of the deep state aspect. X-Protect, the group. X-Protect, which operates, remember, on a psychic level. They operate on a technological level. All the reports of the Men in Black and all the psychic aspects constitute a kind of astral agency, as we've pointed out here. And they've recruited different groups and different types, as I've mentioned over the years, like Laplanders and things of this nature, in order to perform these functions. And so we can get to the bottom of what's been going on in the background here. We're going to take a couple more questions from you. And as I said, we started the day off doing this incredible episode with Alex Jones, appearing on the Alex Jones Show. And just through some psychic synchronicity, on Wednesday, I had been on the Alex Jones Show and we were talking about Obama and his very unusual alien drop, saying, oh yeah, their aliens are real, but they're not at Area 51 and they're not at underground bunkers and all the rest of it. But to say they were real was so provocative that it got under Trump's skin, which is what they wanted to do. And they moved up his own announcement of getting this all declassified and getting the UFO file out. So now they had him on February 19th, spitting that out when his original plan was July 4th, or that Roswell anniversary, somewhere in there, as his daughter-in-law had let out. So we're in kind of uncharted territory here, but I think that we can get to the bottom of this. But I would say it may represent, in a sense, a kind of, it's definitely raising serious stress levels about the clash going on the background side. There were already serious fissures there, and I think this is just throwing it wide open. But Trump, very interestingly, may be just the person to do it. And if he can follow through, if the intelligence, counterintelligence people don't get their hands on his efforts, don't become the ones who are dubbed with the task. And if you see any of those people, filling those positions, then forget it. The ball game's over on that. You'll never get any real disclosure out of the counterintelligence groups that have been, hoisting themselves on the bad podcast scene or the funny podcast scene, the pop click podcast scene, as it were. So I think what you can do here is really look for the potent information. And if you had a potent investigatory team coming out of that Trump administration saying, we want the UFO file, look, Trump wants the UFO file back under executive control. It's been out of control since Eisenhower. So how long has this fight been going on? Keep that in mind as we go along here. So yeah, incredible exposure on this. And we put it across on Alex's show earlier. And we coming together tonight, doing this exciting episode with you is fantastic because we get to go even deeper on the entire thing. We'll take a couple more questions And then we'll leave you for tonight. Yes.
Fred Olson, Jacques Vallée has recently abandoned his, quote, interdimensional hypothesis for a more nuts and bolts approach.
That's interesting. I think that, you see, there are aspects to this. I think that there are esoteric aspects. In fact, I think the only way you can really understand the UFO file is to understand the esoteric aspects behind the interaction of humanity with other beings. So we have stories throughout histories of elementals, people seeing figures that seemed almost translucent, and it's a long human history. Then when it comes to the so-called alien factor, you have people in your family somewhere back there. Somebody's had either a UFO sighting or they've had an encounter or an abduction experience, something. So many of us. But now at this point, it is, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, how far back do you want to go? That's the important aspect of the UFO file to me. The scientific community, the political aspirations, the intelligence moves don't capture the essence of it for me. I think what they do is they consolidate that aspect, and I think they utilize through hypnosis and other things, the subconscious of the people who have had these experiences. I also believe that they have recovered craft that were from somewhere else. And, and just outside of our civilization, whether it's human craft or not, but it certainly could be an off-world visitor as well. One of the classic cases, of course, is the Kecksburg case, where in 1965, in that Western Pennsylvania, again, which is so interesting because Moon, Pennsylvania is there. And we've demonstrated that Moon is kind of a version of Area 51. Now, the other thing that's up there is Mars, Pennsylvania. But right there, of course, in Moon Township, every president has to go. It's almost like a show fealty of some kind. And it's very interesting that the first visit after giving Nixon a pardon that President Ford made was immediately to Moon Township. And Moon has a number of unusual properties to it. But in Kecksburg, they had this incredible crash. And Kecksburg UFO itself was described in this bizarre acorn shape, and it went down on fire. And many people showed up thinking it was a plane crash or whatever, and they got to see it. And a number of them talked about the hieroglyphs that were, again, all over this. You get into Roswell, you get into a number of different cases, and you're going to find hieroglyphics. What they represent, what the symbols mean, there's some deep aspect involved there for humanity. I have no doubt about it. But the comparison there, of course, of the Nazi bell with the acorn-shaped UFO that landed in Kecksburg does suggest that in between 1945, when the Nazis spirited this project off to Argentina, that they developed it, and that there was some kind of a test flight that went awry here in the United States with that technology and crashed in a strange field out there in Kecksburg. The Lonnie Zamora case, when I've looked into it from a number of different levels, the level of his expertise being a policeman and observe his observation. When this craft goes down, the craft has a strange symbol on it that looks like an arrow. When the craft goes down, these figures come out and they look to him like they're human beings, but they're short. He's not that close to them. And there's kind of a weird heat wave coming off of their craft. This is his depiction of their craft. Now, with the landing gear and everything else, this kind of egg shape, you can easily imagine with some of these craft and some of these groups that this is something that is man-made. It was more advanced, though. That's a sighting from 1964. We didn't have anything like that. And this thing could do amazing speeds, as soon as it got off the ground, et cetera. So, we have to take the UFO file factor in mind to understand there are multiple explanations that could be involved here. But whatever it is, it involves a secret and advanced technology. And in some cases, it's a technology that where, like in the Aztec case, when people are studying it, the scientists they get sick, and they figure out very quickly, if I'm in there for more than 20 minutes, the guy passes out, basically. So whatever the environment is of the crafts themselves starts to make you nauseous. But in some cases, it also, just like in some of the stories about the NASA astronauts, you see deceased loved ones. What are those aspects about? So this is a kind of psychic experience being facilitated by a piece of technology. So you see, we're in all kinds of interesting territory. And when we hear that there are psychic technology programs that are related to trying to pilot UFOs when they're doing this redevelopment, we have to take that very seriously, because in the background there is a conversation I had with Russell Targ, who did so much for the remote viewing program, worked with all those psychics, and did this whole thing at Stanford. SRI, he told me that one of the main things that von Braun wanted him to develop was an ESP test for astronauts. So the idea was he wanted to send people up there out into space who were advanced psychically. So we have to ask ourselves, these are the kind of key information points for us to study. And those are the key research points. Why would von Braun be looking for psychic astronauts? So it lends a whole different level to what the space program is really all about. And in fact, he did develop the machine, and they did test the astronauts, and they got the best astronauts who were the best and most psychic. There are stories about the Marcel family that the craft wreckage itself heightened their own psychic ability as well. So when you go deep into this, you're dealing not with, hey, look, this thing can go from 0 to 1,000 miles per hour. Wow. There's that, but there's a whole other thing that is apparently involved. And then when you're dealing with abductions and you're dealing with people seeing children that look like hybrids of, half alien and half human, well, that also takes you into a different kind of territory, right? So we have to understand it's a multidimensional field, and that no quick answer on Fox News is going to cut it. When they have Luna go up there and she's like, yep, they're interdimensional beings. I don't think that Luna even knows what an interdimensional being is. No offense. But, what I would do with a committee like hers is try to get people on there who could give her real answers for things like that. Because, some of the stuff on a superficial level can't be explained superficially. So it sounds ridiculous. And they think that they're providing big answers for society when in fact they're letting everybody down by showing you haven't studied this subject at all. That's the problem with throwing these Congress people in the front of these cameras and getting them to talk about the UFO file. They don't know anything about it. And that's why they can be manipulated as well by the intel people who are like, don't worry, we'll keep you on the inside. And by the way, I talked to those people and counterintelligence people, and they'd be like, yeah, I'm going to give you the real, I'm going to give you the real answers. You just hang in there. We'll talk. And what I do is I tell them right off the bat, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in what you have to tell me. And I'll listen to anything you have to say, but I'm not going to hang out here and, wait for your next drop of intel. I'm not interested in anything like that. No straightforward program. Somebody may not share everything with you right off the bat, but there's no straightforward approach that would keep you dangled with these breadcrumbs. And they did it with everybody. Look at all the Joe Rogan shows with all those people. They were like, oh, I can't tell you, but boy, would I love to, And even Joe Rogan, I think he felt kind of used after a while. He was like, all these counterintelligence people came on here and blabbed away, In the meantime, look at the shows that I've done with Alex, right? They've really delivered deep information around the UFO file. That's the potency that I'm talking about. And we can get it. We've demonstrated you can get a potent conversation about these issues, right? Think of the work we do with people on this program, Gigi Young, Joseph Farrell. I mean, there is a way to do it, and we've provided a way to go forward with it. Miss Olivia, our last two questions of the night.
Okay, I want to make sure I fit this in. Purple
Yes.
Pen People Wants you to talk about Jack Parsons and Aleister Crowley doing sex magic rituals to summon demons. And how this plays into the UFO file.
Wow. Look, when Caltech came up, of course, the first thing that I thought was all about our friend Jack Parsons. And we've done episodes on Parsons. His relationship, look, you have to understand the level that Aleister Crowley was on. Aleister Crowley could summon beings from other dimensions. All right. He knew all of the Golden Dawn info and had taken over the Golden Dawn.
Can I make a point?
Yeah.
I don't think it's that hard. You can be a novice and summon. I mean, that's what a Ouija board does, right? You don't need to be an expert.
Oh, no. Oh, no. For what Crowley did?
Oh, I'm sure he was at a whole other level.
No, the things, like, the things
there
themselves.
are plenty of entities that want to come.
Oh, yeah. No.
Will take any chance they got.
Look, you have to understand, though, like anybody can play baseball, yes, but when Babe Ruth steps up to the plate, then it's a different story, right? Aleister Crowley himself was probably one of the greatest magicians, and the reason he was able to be so great was actually goes back to steganography, strangely enough, because it is Johannes Trithemius who spirits out his different magical incantations and things way back there, this German abbot, and he figures out, if this stuff ever gets out, I'm going to be burnt at the stake because I'm seeing all these spirits in this kind of John Dee type reality. And he says, what I'll do is I'll use the Greek method of a page within a page, the steganography, and I'll write all of my books like that. And then at the end of his life, he writes the book Steganography. This is how you put a page within a page, giving the outline of what steganography is. Well, when I started this show, I mean, I had been doing dark journalism, but when I started the X series, I named it X Steganography because the steganography kept showing up as a footprint throughout all of this. And it wasn't just, hey, it's the wild X thing. No, they were using X as a directly programmable result to move these different secret programs through government agencies. And then when I studied it, the X steganography went further back, and the people who had developed it in the modern era, like Vannevar Bush, for example, he was the worshipful master Mason at the MIT temple. And so he had all of these ancient methods for secrecy. And, the further you go back, the Mayan territory, they were using the X steganography, and it all related back to the Atlantis mystery schools. So you could imagine when you get into this steganography around things, you start to see what it means literally is that it's something, steganography is a little different from the kind of cryptology or cryptograph kind of approach. It is more of something that you see there in plain sight and you're used to all the time, but only an initiate will know what that thing that's sitting there in plain sight actually means. And that's why they can use things like the X steganography to do different things. And think of the practical application of something like that kind of steganography. If you have 20,000 CIA agents, you can have them all tracking the same thing without knowing exactly what it is. That's pretty handy. That's the good kind of compartmentalization that you need in intel work. But yeah, I'm glad that she mentioned that piece. I wanted to mention this, that when we were talking about scientists being assassinated who are part of Caltech, I wanted to go back to a story about Albert Einstein visiting Caltech. And while he makes this visit, a car almost mows him down. It's like a hit and run type situation. And he literally has to do this somersault to get out of the way. It's quite interesting. That happens in 1932. This thing about taking out scientists who are working on these secret projects is a well-established signature. But I think we're seeing a lot of it lately with the Lerero case and with the Caltech case that came out yesterday. This is something to keep an eye on because I think that those types of internecine wars are taking place, and we have to be very aware and strategic about those types of things. And I would implore, those government committees and others to go out of their way to try to protect those types of scientists working on those. I also wanted to point out, in relation to this UFO aspect and idea, that, one of the big UFO crazes of the period of the 50s was George Adamski, and he had all these incredible, UFO photographs and videos and things. And there is a scientist, a billionaire, who was very interested on the scientific aspect of the UFO file, who hired both him, Adamski, and T.T. Brown. And he wanted to bring together this information. And one of the things, a picture from his lab that always struck me, and it's in a T.T. Brown biography, is one of the Adamski craft sitting in a vat of fluid. This is a miniature version, and it lends itself to the idea that they were doing experiments with the miniature version of it, but they understood the miniature version into the larger version. That's Andrew Bonson, who was the millionaire who was doing this, and he was a famous pilot, and he would die 2 years after putting out his book, which was a novel about a group that had developed advanced technology to fool the world that it was alien technology in order to get a peace agreement between the Russians and the Americans so that there wouldn't be nuclear war. Kind of an interesting signature of history. And the Adamski scout ship model in an oil test chamber, this picture tells us a great deal. One of the things that happened when I spoke with the daughter of Thomas Townsend Brown, the very incredible scientist who worked deeply with the UFO file and developed NICAP and all these other things. But she told me that there was a craft landing in their backyard in their ranch in Virginia when she was very young, like 11 years old, and that her dad, T.T. Brown, went out to greet these beings, and that the ship that they came in was one of these Adamski craft. This was her memory of it. And very, very strangely, she would tell me that they gave him something that was almost like an iPhone or an iPad, and it was about that size of a large iPhone, and that it was some kind of communication device that he kept his entire life. So he'd already had, remember, an association.
Did he use it, or was it like an artifact?
No,
It was a communication
no, they gave it
device.
to him for communication purposes.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's remarkable about this is he had already had these encounters with orbs and things, and this whole interaction that would take place. An orb, he went to the same prep school as Trump. You know that about Thomas Townsend Brown?
Wow.
And the orb he witnesses when he's a young man over the river with his horse comes directly at his third eye. So it hits him, and it freaks the horse out, and he passes out, and he sees his entire life as it's to come down the road, everything that will take place, and all the influences and things that he will have. So eventually he builds a technology that can do that, and according to his assistants, he made it. But one of the things that she told me, and I think we should bear this in mind without casting aspersions, but from other things that I've heard, it really does add up and make sense. And she mentions a character there who was involved with T.T. Brown, and he's Hal Puthoff, who was, one of the main charges behind the remote viewing program and all the rest, but got involved with pushing this whole CIA version. He's worked for the CIA for 40 years, and he was pushing the CIA UFO threat version. So on his deathbed in the hospital, he has come up to T.T. Brown, and he's pressuring T.T. Brown, giving him this incredibly hard time. And the daughter can't tell what's going on there. Like, why is he hassling my father? So she goes in to see Brown, and he says to her, they want the device. Hal Puthoff wants my device that the group gave me. And he says, they'll never get it. And he says, I want you to know another thing. See that man? And he points to Hal Puthoff. He says, never deal with him ever for anything. And basically is like telling her, you know, that's a complete black hole right there. So you have to think about that story in context, of course. This is T.T. Brown's personal experience, but he was a deep, deep scientist. For him to say that, and the whole thing about the device and all the rest, I think is powerful testimony about what you're up against when you're dealing in this field, because it is such a shadow field. And you have these scientists who are so ruthless around the UFO file that, you know, anyone who has any kind of conscience when they're dealing with them, you know, that's why I think he's sitting there telling his daughter, look, you know, that guy over there has no conscience when it comes to getting to the truth of the UFO file. And that's why he's shouting in T.T. Brown's face on his deathbed. So I think these are the types of characters that we're dealing with. I've had a little bit of experience of them myself, and I would say it's a very accurate kind of snapshot. At the same time, there are fantastic people in the field, and thank God for that. But I think we always should be really, you know, we have to be vigilant in the field of the UFO file study, especially at this crucial point. I think this is really a turning point in a lot of ways. And with that, Miss Olivia, your last question of the evening, please.
Nanette Chris says, ancient history records the emperor of both China and the Maya had a, quote, mirror tablet device where they could see and talk to the gods.
Oh, wow. Well, I really believe that. And we've heard this, you know, this is all Lord of the Rings as well. There's this aspect. One of the interesting things about the Lord of the Rings, of course, is you're looking at it and it's looking, when you look at it, it can see you. So, you know, it reminds me very much of the coordinates of being sketched out for every person on Earth to be, as Ilana Freeland has said, a walking tower. What a great quote from her work as well. A couple of quick pictures here. One is, of course, Junior. And as I pointed out about Junior, this is Betty Hill's drawing of the alien she interacted with. One of the things she said about it is, you know, all those pictures that you see of the grays with the big eyes and everything, like, that's not what I saw. What I saw was this thing. It basically looked like a human, except didn't have any hair and had bigger eyes. So this would lend itself to more of the idea that this is a human origin group, more advanced than we are. They're not from Alpha Centauri or wherever. And that this aspect is the unknown part. The people who've seen these things is not the same as what Betty Hill saw. They are different, whatever they are. And there are multiple sightings of those. So we're left with that phantom, as it were, the question, the mystery of it. And I think we have to be happy to unravel the mystery over time. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Scarlet Pricer, this is what Hillary really looks like.
The question is, are you insulting the alien? You got to be careful. All right. Your last question, and of course...
Okay, I'm going to make it a comment and not a question.
Yes.
Leo Roaring Ohm. DJ, your decade-plus coverage on the subject has been incredible, helping make sense in the disinformation chaos through the disclosure road. Though the disclosure road won't end here, we should celebrate this historic episode and this historic moment in time.
No question
We're all
about
a part of it.
No question about it. And think about the incredible researchers that we've interacted with. Some of them are no longer here. People like Defense Minister Paul Hellyer, who shared so much with me in public and private. He was on this program, and he was a real hero to bring out his information about the UFO file. Stanton Friedman, of course, who I mentioned, no longer here. Jim Mars. These are remarkable people who gave us deep insights that I think could really, you know, influence us over time and really stimulate our insights. And they're also just great people. You know, I can tell you that somebody like Stan Friedman, you know, I'll tell you what's interesting about Friedman, because I was talking about Eisenhower with Alex today, and Stan Friedman has that story about the alien meeting with Eisenhower. And there is, of course, all these details about him taking time and pretending he's going to the dentist and going to this air base in California. And Stanton Friedman, who was hardcore and cynical in some ways around the different characters around the UFO field, and had no time for Bob Lazar and his lying about his education and all that stuff. He said that there was an incredible body of evidence that, in fact, Ike had met with aliens, and that there were, in fact, verifiable good witnesses for what had taken place that day, that an unusual craft had come into this airfield, and that that Ike had gone out to meet him. Well, Trump is next. And that Ike had gone out to meet them, and that there was some kind of exchange there. And of course, we hear about the Greada Treaty and the things that, supposedly it was allowed that certain abductions would happen as long as we knew who. And then at a certain point, the Greys just were like, forget about telling you what we're doing. We're just going to do it. There are a lot of aspects there. There's also the interactions with the aliens that look like us, Pleiadians, and they wanted to give us more philosophy, less technology, and that we went with the Greys, who were a little bit, more diabolical and out for themselves. It's hard to say without evidence about those stories, but I don't think it's out of bounds at all to consider that the government is already involved in some kind of communication on this level. I think that it feeds a level of resolve, that there's some group there in the middle of all that harvesting that type of knowledge or those types of relationships. That to me is worthy evidence-based speculation, shall we say. And your last question, by the way, it's X-Series 216, Trump, Deep State Battle for the UFO Files, Secret Tech. By the way, if you're new here, go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's the way you're going to get around all the censorship that we've been experiencing. And it is major. To get what you're basically going to get is incredible information about interviews we have coming up for you, fascinating X-Series episodes, appearances, live events, docuseries, JFK and the UFO File, the Craze in the Hot Zone. So much of that is coming out now. We put out all the secret emails from Terry Waite, who was Ghislaine's lover, about them going to find Atlantean ruins off Cuba and to search for gold, etc. We were able to search through the files and get those. And what they do is they help to complement the 40-some episodes we have of the Hot Zone, dealing with Atlantean ruins in the Hot Zone, associating characters all the way from Ghislaine Maxwell to Ernest Hemingway in that area, John Lennon, people who believed that Atlantis was located there, but then British intelligence agents saying, yeah, there were ruins there, and they are the subject of a major geopolitical hotspot. That is the Hot Zone area. So we were able to confirm that. We put that in the episode 2 weeks ago. We've put it up on X and other places. I think that along with this is quite an echo, quite a rumble, quite an earthquake in the heart of all this. You're up, Miss Olivia.
I'm going to actually ask this as my last question.
Yes.
So, okay, the alien question is huge. It goes back. We don't even know how far, right?
Yes.
When you think about ancient aliens, are we hybrids ourselves? All this. What is, using Occam's razor? Okay, what is the minimum disclosure that you would be satisfied with at this time under Trump?
Well, I think what they need to do is get their hands on the programs of studying this advanced technology that have fallen out of the executive branch. The groups that are handling that, it's in the heart of X-Protect. The X-Protect group operates between intelligence and the aerospace companies. The tracks and the footprints, the roadmap for those groups are there. You have to go to the heart of it. You have to go to the defense contractors dealing with aerospace. There's no question about it. What's interesting is other people came to the exact same conclusion. For example, Jim Garrison, who investigated the Kennedy assassination, he said, actually, and he went on the record with this. He said, the groups, we were wrong. It wasn't the Texas oil people who did this. It was the aerospace wing of the military industrial complex. That was his final conclusion. So these are people who spent, time, energy, risked their lives to get to the truth of these things. Why were they thinking aerospace? Why has my research led me over and over again to research? Why is the UFO file surrounding the Kennedy assassination? Why, when we get anywhere around the UFO file since 2017, is it surrounded like vultures by CIA people, penning narratives, pretending to be heroes? Oh, we owe so much to the CIA whistleblower. No, they're playing a role. They're going to work. That's their job. They're counterintelligence people. They lie for a living. That's what they do. So I'm never going to take them seriously. What we need is an investigatory body, and we need that investigation to be by honest citizens. That's where you're going to get the real takeaway on the UFO file. And certainly that's the way for this to go. If the Trump effort turns out to be all those counterintelligence people gathering around to get their book deal and their book agents and all this stuff like that, then that's just a waste of anybody's time. But I think that Trump has the background, and that he needs, it doesn't look like Don Jr. is a good filter because he allows in all the counterintelligence people. But if he can keep onto this track and get to the bottom of UFO disclosure through his pronouncement and through his demand of the Department of Defense and related agencies, would include the Central Intelligence Agency, you'd go right to the heart of the deep state secrecy and that control. And that would be a real earthquake. And so when people say to you, hey, UFOs are a distraction, no, because if you could get to the bottom of the UFO file, you could open everything else up. That's the real answer.
Yeah.
And,
people in the ideas room are saying 0 point energy. It's what they want to get off of the system, and that will liberate us.
Well, it's interesting. I think it's deeper to me than that.
No, but that's sort of like, it's minimum,
Yes.
This is what we should demand and expect, because Stanton talked about this, if they're coming here, they're not using rocket fuel. Right?
I think,
so that's it. It's energy, and energy that could liberate, every person on the planet from being the slaves that we are.
Well, I think that's so interesting. A consideration. And of course, energy plays right into the heart of it. I don't mean to minimize it. I just mean that it's, that's one of the major aspects that are involved there. But this idea of a small elite group, hoarding that information that's important to humanity for their own financial profit, for their own advantage, for their own gain. And you could say, well, they're doing it for a military advantage. Well, for how long? Remember, sometimes people say, oh, yeah, well, they had the stealth bomber and then everybody knew what it was. Well, flying saucers and stuff, Kenneth Arnold's story is 1947, right? That's going to be 80 years in next year. So, they would have let it out after 20 years or something. So no, the aircraft, UFOs weren't ours. That's a fact. They were somebody else's. So what happens after the fact of us redeveloping them, that whole story, that's what needs to be unpacked. And what the origin of that is explosive, I think. And some people say that UFOs are the most important story ever told. But in fact, I don't think so. I actually think that resurrection is the biggest story around humanity and our own psychic past in Atlantis. And I think the UFO aspect is a related kind of raising of our own consciousness around this. And remember, there's a great wave of materialism forcing the UFO aspect into this whole nuts and bolts. Hey, they came here in a metal craft and it was a certain type of premium they were putting in the tank. And it's kind of ridiculous, it's not just that. And it's not, oh, they're here to shoot us up and we need $1 trillion defense grid. That's already been proven, because if they were here to shoot us up, they already would have done that. They're obviously not here to shoot us up. So the UFO threat is just a ploy to get emergency powers. That's the goal of that deep state group, and there's no question about it. That's where I would come down, and I think that's enough that we put on the record for this tonight. However, we're going to do some, well, you do your super chats first.
Okay.
By the way, that is T.T. Brown demonstrating the acoustic fan, which at Rand Corporation, the only picture of him demonstrating it before it disappears. And
where does it go?
Yeah, isn't that a good question?
What's your theory?
Oh, they used it. They used it. But what it could do was when the person passed in front of it, they would see everything about their lives in the future. Another weird thing.
And their past?
Everything. Yeah. He had redeveloped it from his own experience of having the sphere hit him outside of a river in that prep school. So, but the acoustic fan had a different thing that his daughter told me about, which is the acoustic fan had a property where any sound that was created in the vicinity, you could make a sound, and the tune of it, the melody of it, would stay with you, the vibration of it, for days. So if somebody said something to you while the acoustic fan was on, you'd walk around for days and you'd hear the essence of that. So the person who was part of the demonstration, this is in 1968 that he does the demonstration, but it is Curtis LeMay, who famously was the one who tried to get JFK supposedly to attack the unidentified flying objects that were interfering with their tests. So this is an old, deep story of humanity, and it is explosive. And we're going to track it here on the X series. Miss Olivia, you're up.
Okay. Jonna Red Star, Empire of the Light, Kimberly Dave, Debbie McAdoo, Philip Gillenwater, Bricklayer's Daughter, My Old School 65, Eurythmia's Fun, R.A. Stephen, Chris Sevenbrook, The Weed in Your Garden, Alchemy by Angela, JJ Loves Animals, Tim Houston, Sala 9324, Erica Swenson Elliott, Fulcanelli, 1900 Chili Willy, Sarah Jane, Ed Cooksey, Robert Scott, Jennifer and Bucks, Beatty Mon, Leo Roaring Ohm, Nightline Legal, and Sick of the BS. Thank you so much for your generous super chats tonight.
Wow, we really appreciate it. And we couldn't do what we do without your support. To all our subscribers, thank you, because it makes all the difference. We will see you next week, and I'm anticipating a lot is going to go down in relation to this. There's going to be a lot of buzz from the brave move that President Trump took today on UFO disclosure. Let's see how far down the field we can take that. I'll do some shout outs before we leave here. I love your work. Thank you so much, says Soldier Voice. Thank you, Soldier Voice. It's great to have you here. In fact, it's great to have everyone out there. And it's nice. Yeah, I do. There are people here from the Alex Show. The Ideas Room is great, says Belial. That's great to have you here. Fanfare, indeed. Sally, super to have you out there. Deep State, you're fired. Did you say Gigi was in the chat?
I did not see her.
Okay, Scarlet Fire. Nikola Tesla was granted a U.S. patent number 1655144, January 1928, an apparatus for aerial transportation, which he described as a flying machine capable of vertical takeoff and landing. Very, very interesting indeed. Acoustic fan inside phones. Yeah, good point, actually. Michael McCausland, your vagus nerve transmits and receives. Very interesting. Luminex, so are we on COG watch now? Absolutely. I think that all bets are off. We're in uncharted territory now with Trump's statement. There's no question about it. It's exciting, and also I think he has to be very careful with how he pulls this off. Nikola Tesla, indeed, Scarlet Fire. Do you remember... Oh, here's some good ones. E.T. movie was a test. Yes. Orber. Very interesting indeed. Elsid Barrett is out there. Let's see what else we got. UFO, have you seen one? Chili Willy. Excellent question for everyone. Yeah, I believe so. But I when I hear about the real hardcore sightings that people have, I don't think I've had anything that great. DJ, your interview with Alex Jones was great. It was surprising how little he knew on multiple topics. Thank you for your clarity. Well, thank you, Nanette. I'll tell you, I found it just the opposite. I found that Alex knew a great deal about the UFO file, which I was always interested in the fact that he knew so much about things like von Braun, and he also has had his own psychic experiences. He knew when President Trump was going to win and what time he was going to come down to give his victory speech, which I think is incredible. Yes.
Pat Goida. Trump says he's going to do what he can to release the so-called UFO files. I'd like to see if he gets one-upped by Putin and they release what they know in total.
Well, the Russian UFO file is dramatic and major. However, they are so secretive. I wonder if they would even bother, because remember, both sides are kind of like, it's a smokescreen, because each one has something the other side wants. So they don't want to give everything away, as it were. Trump has the background, but not the character or incentive. Well, it could be argued that way when you get to any president. We'll see, I suppose, is the answer. Psychics still go to that old hospital and say, there's an alien watching us still after 70 years. Okay, you're going to have to explain that one. 442, Sadie Love. Thank you. Cult of Intelligence. Rotten Crypto Biz. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Illuminati says, yep. I like that. DJ for president, thank you for a lifetime of dedication and risk. See, problem is, if I got in as president, I'd just go straight for the UFO file. Everything else would go to hell. Oh, wow. UFOs, you really recall. Actually, I'd lead an expedition to Bimini as my first ag. Greer has briefed presidents. Well, maybe he has. I don't know. There's never been any proof of that. John Lennon had a UFO sighting. He had a couple. And the story that Uri Geller tells is that he woke up and had 4 beings around him, small grays. And that he got an egg from them, and he kept the egg the whole time. That he passed it along to Uri Geller. And some 40 years later, Uri Geller showed the egg. I will tell you this. However you want to think about Geller, he was very close friends with John Lennon. So I wonder, makes you wonder. The whole thing makes you wonder. Understanding of UFOs and ETs will change. Absolutely. Wow. John Heyerdahl, everyone, what a fantastic show here tonight. And let's see. Oh, the comments still keep coming in. Good night, dear X-Fam. Yes, Najat, it's great to see you out there. Fantastic. Have a fantastic weekend. I spoke to Mao. Interesting. Yeah, Luke, I am your father. AJ is a PhD. Well, one way or another, he certainly is. Oh, let's see here. Alex is extraordinary. He just needs to turn his filters up higher. He does an incredible thing. That show is remarkable.
He's one of a kind.
He really, and think about all the different things he's brought forward. He's just an incredible figure out there and all this. And I appreciate all of his incredible spreading of these truths. And we have a great time too. I'll tell you this. I've always enjoyed talking with Alex, and we actually get along quite well. I am the Eggman, says Skip Peak, and that's going to be the last comment of the night.
Right on.
And it's fantastic to have everyone in here. We will see you all next week. The story is exploding. It's getting bigger, and we are in the middle of a wave here. We have President Trump to thank for it. Let's see just how far we get. And Miss Olivia, it says end broadcast, but after all,
never really ends.
It never really ends. And never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot, and there can be again. This could be a segue, an opening to a different kind of a future if we're big enough to take it. So let's think of it that way. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
God bless.
Sleep tight. And we'll see you all again very, very soon.